Chapter 27:45. Mu Yanqing came to his senses as well. His eyes were filled with anger, as if a storm was brewing. Finally, he gritted his teeth and enunciated each word clearly. "What's the name of your employer?" "I don't know." Luo Qing lowered his head, appearing extremely guilty. How could she tell us her name so easily? This is not something to be proud of. We did not find out her identity or name. We only know that she seems to have a strong background and is very generous. She offered a high price of 500,000 yuan and said that as long as we complete the task, she will give us 500,000 yuan as a reward. 500,000 yuan. Was Mu Yanqing's child so cheap? Do you really not know her name, or are you deliberately hiding it from us? Chu Ho suddenly questioned. Luo Qing kept quiet. Luo Hao, who was standing at the side, suddenly thought of something and stammered. I remember that her surname is Song. She's a very young woman, dressed to the nines with heavy makeup. Her tone is very arrogant, like a rich missy from a big family. Song. At the mention of this name, Mu Yanqing's expression changed. He seemed to have some idea of the employer's identity. Xianxia. It's her. However, if it was Xianxia, it was not surprising that she would do such a thing. She probably knew that Meng Qingxue had left the capital and secretly settled down in Yan City to take care of her pregnancy. Meng Qingxue was pregnant with his child. If Meng Qingxue secretly gave birth to this child, it would indeed be extremely disadvantageous for her. He was not surprised that she would do this. Meng Qingxue was stunned, only to see a strange expression on Mu Yanqing's face. Being a sensitive person, she immediately guessed that he must have guessed who this employer with the surname Song was. Furthermore, he was very familiar with it, so when Luo Hao mentioned this surname, Mu Yanqing's expression changed instantly. You know her? Meng Qingxue could not help but ask. Mu Yanqing remained silent. Tell me. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists and said coldly. At this point, are you still trying to guard against me and hide everything from me? Mu Yanqing. I'm sure you know who this employer is. Tell me. Who is it? Mu Yanqing looked at her with a complicated expression. Then he took a deep breath and said weakly, Xianxia. Xianxia? This name was unfamiliar to Meng Qingxue, and she was puzzled. Mu Yanqing stroked his forehead with a headache and explained, She's my fiancée. Boom. Meng Qingxue's mind went blank at the sound of the explosion. That night, before I left the capital, I called you. Was she the woman who answered the call? Meng Qingxue made a bold guess. Mu Yanqing did not intend to avoid the topic and merely nodded silently. Meng Qingxue suddenly found it extremely funny. She laughed coldly and fell on the bed in a daze. For a moment, she felt like laughing and crying at the same time. She wanted to cry because she had almost lost the child in her stomach because of this woman. What was laughable was that he had openly announced Xianxia's fiancé. How ironic. Indeed. What reason did she have not to do so? Chapter 27:46. As Mu Yanqing's fiancé and the future young mistress of the Mu family, what reason did this woman, Xianxia, have to let her hide in an unfamiliar corner of the city and secretly give birth to her and Mu Yanqing's flesh and blood? This child was a huge threat to her status. There was no reason for her to let it go. Hence, hiring a hitman to kill her had become a duty-bound action. She wanted to kill the child in her womb before it was born. She wanted to kill it while it was still in the womb. What a vicious woman. What a cruel method. Meng Qingxue sneered. Very well. This woman was so shrewd and scheming that she couldn't help but shudder in fear. However, at the same time, a certain force in her heart silently awakened. Since this woman called Xianxia had declared war on her in such a way, what reason did she have to hide in a corner and drag out an ignoble existence? Did she want to eliminate her and snatch Mu Yanqing away from her? Dream on. Meng Qingxue decided that no matter what, she would fight Xianxia to the end. She wanted to take back everything that belonged to her, even if it didn't belong to her. With this thought in mind, Meng Qingxue laughed coldly. Seeing her sneer, Mu Yanqing thought that she had been provoked. Just as he was about to walk over, Meng Qingxue pushed him away fiercely. Looking at Luo Qing and Luo Hao, she questioned fiercely, Where is the child now? Great aunt, we really don't know. After taking the money, We took it that we had completed our mission and left. How could we be in the mood to care about that child? So, you left the child there? Luo Qing did not dare to speak. Where did you take the child? Seeing that they did not say a word, Chu He suddenly raised her leg and kicked Luo Hao's shoulder fiercely. There was a cracking sound, which seemed to be the sound of a dislocated shoulder joint. Luo Hao immediately clutched his shoulder and fell to the ground. She took a step forward, grabbed him by the collar and said coldly, "If you don't tell me the truth, I won't be merciful anymore. Speak." An abandoned warehouse in the outskirts of the capital. Luo Hao was in so much pain that he howled like a pig being slaughtered. His lips trembled as he said, "The location of the transaction is a warehouse in the suburbs. That place used to be a famous industrial area. Later on it was abandoned. As for the specific coordinates, I really remember them all too clearly. I only remember that there were many abandoned factories there. At that time, the child was left alone in the warehouse. After that we left. Please spare my life. Please spare my life." Mother ****. Chu Ho cursed for the first time. He couldn't wait to tear these two men into pieces. I seem to remember a place in the suburbs of Beijing. It used to be a large industrial area. Later, the government wanted to transform it into an ecological park. However, the land was too polluted, so the project was put on hold and it became a deserted place. Mu Yanqing recalled for a moment and had some ideas. Meng Qingxue held his wrist tightly and said anxiously, "Then we will return to the capital tomorrow. The most important thing now is to find Chu Xiaobao as soon as possible. Maybe he's still there." What about you?" he asked out of the blue. Chapter 2747. Meng Qingxue glanced at Chu Ho, then looked deeply at Mu Yanqing before nodding solemnly. "Okay. I'll go back to the capital with you." Mu Yanqing's eyes lit up. "Really? You've changed your mind?" "Yes." Meng Qingxue had already made up her mind to fight Song Enya head-on. Since the latter was pushing her so hard and leaving no room for negotiation, then there was no need for her to hide and show mercy. Mu Yanqing was hers to begin with. She would no longer be weak. Even if she had to resort to unscrupulous means, she would take back what belonged to her. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists tightly and said to Chu Ho, "Chu Ho, no matter what it takes, I must find Xiaobao." "Don't worry," Chu Ho said. "I'll go with you." Mu Yanqing glanced at Meng Qingxue. Seeing that she did not object, he nodded. "Then let's pack up immediately and prepare to return to the capital." "Okay." Ever since Gu Jinglian scolded Xiaobao that night, Xiaobao did not like to stick to him, nor did he call him uncle. In the morning, Xiaobao woke up and stayed in his room alone. Uncle Fu liked him, so he took special care of him and carried a stack of comics for him. Uncle Fu had specially bought this stack of comics. Uncle Fu realized that this child seemed to be especially interested in drawing. No matter how restless he was, once a comic book was placed in front of him, he would immediately calm down. Hence, for the entire morning, Xiaobao stayed in his room and quietly flipped through the comic books. During lunchtime, a call from the police station came in. On the other end, the deputy chief was holding the DNA report and comparing it with the data obtained from the DNA gene bank. He held the phone in his hand and was confused. He did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "Xiaobao's DNA test results are out. When will you bring him to the police station to find out more about it? Have you found his family members?" "Yes. But I'm a little doubtful about the authenticity of this result. Perhaps there's a mistake with the system. So, is it convenient for you to tell Mr. Gu to come to the police station with Xiaobao personally? There are some situations that require his presence." Uncle Fu furrowed his brows, nodded and said solemnly, "I understand." As soon as Gu returned to the Gu residence, Uncle Fu came up to him nervously and briefly explained the matter. "Why do you want me to go?" "That's what the chief said." "President Gu, do you have any plans for the afternoon?" "No." Gu Jinglian said lightly, "I have no patience for that child anymore. You can just send him to the police station." After saying that, he walked around Uncle Fu and walked towards the study. Butler Fu suddenly chased after him carefully and said worriedly, "Mr. Gu, I suspect that the director asked you to go with him personally, not because of any other reason. It's because you have to go." Gu Jinglian sized him up coldly with a strange expression. He asked faintly, What do you mean by that? Uncle Fu stammered and seemed to have some concerns. I can't really say because there's something that I'm not sure about. Anyway, old master, there's nothing wrong with you going along and personally verifying it. Chapter 2748. Uncle Fu could only explain vaguely. I don't really understand what the deputy bureau chief meant. He only said that there are some things that you need to verify personally. I suspect that the results of the DNA investigation are probably related to you. Me? Gu Jinglian curled his lips coldly and his gaze gradually turned cold. What does it have to do with me? Uncle Fu lifted his eyes and glanced at him. Then he said carefully, it's a parent-child relationship. Gu Jinglian's expression changed. Then, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, he said coldly, You're joking with me. Old master, I wouldn't dare. Even if I had eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts, I would never dare to joke about such things. Uncle Fu felt extremely wronged. He looked like he was about to burst into tears. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. That's impossible. How can that little rascal be my son? He's so timid and stupid. My son would definitely not be as stupid as him. Uncle Fu thought to himself, isn't it a little too early for old master to say these words? What if he got slapped in the face? Suddenly, there was some movement in the room. Uncle Fu could not care less about Gu Jinglian's expression. He hurriedly pushed open the door and rushed into the room. He saw Xiao Bao lying on the bed, his tender and fair legs bouncing up and down. He seemed to be really satisfied. The commotion just now was because his movements were a little too big, and he accidentally swept the finished comic book to the ground. When Uncle Fu carried Xiao Bao out of the room, Chu Xiao Bao was halfway through the comic book. It was an exciting moment when he was abruptly interrupted. He felt extremely wronged. His little face was wrinkled and he looked like he wanted to cry but had no tears. However, when Uncle Fu carried him out, the little guy looked up and saw Gu Jinglian leaning against the door with his arms crossed and a cold expression. Especially when the little guy met Gu Jinglian's incomparably cold gaze, his originally stormy little face completely collapsed. He closed his eyes tightly and opened his mouth, letting out a wail. He was so frightened that he started crying loudly. Wah! Gu Jinglian was already in a bad mood. He was even more baffled by the little guy's actions. His face suddenly became gloomy, and as a result, his expression became even more cold and terrifying. Xiao Bao could not help but feel his hair stand on end. He grabbed Uncle Fu's sleeve tightly. Because he was afraid, he finally could not care less about his little stubbornness and started crying loudly and wantonly. I want to go home. Mommy! He cried loudly and hugged Uncle Fu tightly. Tears rolled down from his eyes uncontrollably. Mommy! I want Mommy! Gu Jinglian had a splitting headache from his actions. He shouted angrily, Don't cry! This ferocious cold shout scared Xiao Bao even more. He waved his hands, obviously wanting to stay away from Gu Jinglian as if he was seeking protection. He stared at Uncle Fu with tears in his eyes, making people feel pity for him. Sob sob. I want to go home. I don't want this, Uncle. Xiao Bao, don't cry, okay? Be good. We'll take you to find Mommy. Uncle Fu immediately comforted him. Uncle, carry me, okay? I don't want him. I don't want this uncle. This uncle is so fierce, he'll definitely eat me. Chapter 2749. Even if uncle doesn't eat me up, he'll break my neck and feed me to the dogs. Boo-hoo. Xiao Bao doesn't want to die. Gu Jinglian's threat from last night was still fresh in his mind. Uncle Fu coaxed him helplessly. Uncle is not a monster. Gu Jinglian was extremely helpless. He finally couldn't take it anymore and sent someone to drive the car over. Then he instructed Uncle Fu, hurry up and send this little guy to the police station. With that said, he went into the study in frustration and slammed the door shut. Uncle Fu couldn't help but shrug nervously at the loud noise. Uncle Fu had no choice but to send Xiao Bao to the police station alone. The car slowly drove into the police station. Uncle Fu carried Xiao Bao out of the car and walked into the police station. The bureau chief had been waiting for him for a long time. He was surprised to see that Gu Jinglian didn't come with him. Where's Mr. Gu? Mr. Gu is very busy. Deputy Bureau Chief, please tell me what you need. The Deputy Bureau Chief frowned and sighed. It's like this. We sent Xiao Bao's DNA to the gene bank for comparison. The results are a complete match with Mr. Gu's. That means, this child might be related to Mr. Gu by blood. Might be. We can't rule out the possibility that there's something wrong with the system. So I wanted to invite Mr. Gu along to see if he's willing to cooperate and do a DNA test with Xiaobao. This way, the results will be more accurate. Uncle Fu lowered his head and glanced at Xiaobao, who was trembling in his arms. He frowned and suddenly hissed. He seemed to be worried. As if he had gone through a long mental struggle, he suddenly asked cautiously, Mr. Gu, isn't here. But for the DNA test, can we use his hair? When he was cleaning the room this morning, he paid special attention to the bed pillow. It took him a lot of effort to find a very short strand of hair on Gu Jinglian's bed. Thus he collected it. It was not because of any other reason. It was because Xiaobao and Gu Jinglian looked too similar. In this world, there were no two leaves that were exactly the same, and there were no two people who looked so similar for no reason. They weren't related to each other, but not only were their facial features similar, the unintentional expression between their eyebrows was also 50% similar. He paid special attention to it. Coincidentally, the deputy director had called him in the morning to tell him the results. Uncle Fu felt even more strange in his heart. He increasingly suspected that Xiaobao and Gu Jinglian were really related by blood. Could it be that he was Master's illegitimate child? Thus, Uncle Fu carefully took out a well-wrapped handkerchief from his pocket. He opened the handkerchief and carefully wrapped a strand of hair in the middle. The deputy bureau chief asked, "Are you sure this strand of hair belongs to President Gu? If you make a mistake, it will affect the results." "It can't be wrong. Next, I'll have to trouble the deputy director to examine it." The deputy bureau chief nodded. "It's a small matter. We'll get the results in the afternoon." Then, Uncle Fu immediately asked, "Have you found the child's mother?" "No." "No?" The deputy bureau chief nodded solemnly. "There are still no results in the DNA database. Anyway, the DNA test will take some time. I'll contact you in the afternoon when the results are out." Chapter 2750. In the car, Xiaobao sat sullenly in Uncle Fu's arms. He pouted and muttered, "Uncle, that uncle is also very fierce to you. Don't you hate him? Although old master's temper is a little eccentric, he's very good to me. Although he doesn't show his concern, there are times when he occasionally shows his gentleness." The little guy did not understand what Uncle Fu was saying. He tilted his head with a puzzled expression and blinked his black eyes at him, but he did not understand the adult language. In the little guy's heart, Uncle Fu was a very gentle elder who was good to him and cared about him. In comparison, although that handsome uncle had a beautiful face, he felt that his heart was very black. It turned out that not all bad people were ugly. There were also people like this uncle who, although good-looking, was actually fierce and evil, just like a demon king. In Xiao Bao's ignorant heart, Gu Jinglian's image had already been stamped with a seal of approval. A demon king. If Uncle Fu knew what the little guy was silently criticizing at this moment, he would probably not know whether to laugh or cry. Last night, Meng Qingxue decided to return to the capital with Mu Yanqing. Naturally, Chu Ho wanted to follow them. After obtaining a precious clue, she naturally wanted to go to the capital personally to find Xiao Bao. Hence, there was no time to even pack her luggage. Anyway, to Meng Qingxue, there was nothing useful, just some personal belongings and daily necessities. These could be bought again when they returned to the capital. Now that time was of the essence, it was not something that could be measured by these worldly possessions. Meng Qingxue and Mu Yanqing were in the same car. Chu Ho, on the other hand, was in the other car. She had not slept for 2 days and 2 nights and was extremely tired. Hence, not long after she got into the car and set off, she leaned against the back seat and fell asleep. Where was Meng Qingxue? She was also exhausted. She had been on tenterhooks for 2 to 3 days. Although she closed her eyes to rest, she did not sleep well. After all, she had been trembling in fear and worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts, so she could not sleep well. Hence, after getting into the car, she leaned on Mu Yanqing's shoulder and closed her eyes to rest. After a while, she fell into a deep sleep. Feeling the weight on his shoulders, Mu Yanqing tilted his head to look at her before lowering his gaze to her flat stomach. He did not know if it was because she was too skinny, but her lower abdomen still looked flat and did not show any signs of bulging. She was probably too thin. He remembered that when his sister was pregnant, Her belly was already slightly swollen at 3 months. What about Qing Shui? There were no signs of pregnancy. And Qing Shui? He glanced at her and saw that she was sleeping peacefully. He lowered his eyes and unexpectedly reached out his large palm. His warm palm gently pressed against her lower abdomen. His movements were extremely gentle, as if he was afraid that if his movements were too big, it would disturb the little life that was still sleeping in her stomach. Even through the belly, he couldn't sense any signs of life. She was more than 3 months pregnant, so there shouldn't be any fetal movements, right? He often saw men who were excited to become expectant fathers and excitedly pressed their hands against their bellies to listen to the fetal movements. He felt that it was ridiculous. Chapter 2751. It should be laughable, right? However, the birth of a life could indeed change a man's mentality to a great extent. Initially, when he learned about the birth of the little life, he was at a loss and even a little suspicious. One had to know that he had always taken good contraceptive measures. He rarely let her take pills. It was not that he had never had sex with other women, but usually after having sex, he would urge his women to take the morning after pill. After all, there were many women who wanted to carry his child. Naturally, he would not let any fish escape the net. However, when it came to Meng Qingxue, he was more proactive. Usually, he would take the initiative to take precautions. Sometimes, when he really could not help himself and was not prepared beforehand, he would let her make up for it afterward. However, it was also very rare. After all, he knew that it was not good for a woman's health to take such pills. However, when he found out that she had a child with him, he found it hard to accept at first. He was not ready to be a father yet. A man in his 20s was still very playful. Especially at this critical juncture where the Mu group was in a crisis, he felt even more repulsed. Gradually, however, it was only after Meng Qingxue left that he came to realize that he had developed so many feelings for her that he should not have. He actually had great expectations for the little life in her stomach. He actually did something that he used to think was the stupidest thing. For example, Mu Yanqing carefully held her head, bent down slightly, and gently pressed his ear to her lower abdomen. However, after listening for a while, he did not hear anything special. There shouldn't be any fetal movement in 3 months, right? Mu Yanqing furrowed his brows and muttered to himself. He raised his head and met Meng Qingshue's indifferent gaze. Why was she awake? Mu Yanqing thought of how she had seen all of his silly actions earlier. Feeling embarrassed, he could not help fidgeting uneasily in his seat. When did she wake up? Wasn't she asleep? Then, did she see everything he did just now? Mu Yanqing bit his lip speechlessly. Meng Qingxue could not help but ask him, "What are you doing?" Ahem. Mu Yanqing furrowed his brows and pretended to be calm. Picking things up. Meng Qingxue smiled and asked, "Why are your ears on my stomach when you're picking things up?" Mu Yanqing was even more at a loss for words. Meng Qingxue suddenly said, "It's still early. I can't hear any fetal movements." Mu Yanqing did not bother to hide it anymore. He cleared his throat awkwardly as his cheeks turned unnaturally red. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. Mu Yanqing was stunned for a moment. He picked up his phone and saw a string of numbers flashing on the screen. The number was not saved, but from the last digit, he knew that it was Xianxia's number. He did not make any special remarks. Mu Yanqing stared at the number in a daze. After a moment of hesitation, he suddenly hung up. Meng Qingxue had a strange look on her face. She couldn't help but ask, "Why aren't you answering?" "Oh, it's not a particularly important call." "Was it Xianxia calling?" Meng Qingxue asked. Mu Yanqing's face stiffened again. Before he could explain himself, his phone rang again. It was Xianxia, who was persistent in calling him. The urgent ringtone kept urging him to hurry up. Chapter 2752. Meng Qingxue said calmly, "It's okay. Just answer it. She must have something important to tell you." He said, "I don't want to answer it." "But you haven't answered it, and she keeps calling. The ringtone is very noisy." Since Meng Qingxue had said so, Mu Yanqing seemed to have no reason not to answer the call. He was worried that Meng Qingxue would mind, but seeing her indifferent expression, he answered the call. "Hello, Yanqing. Why did you hang up on me just now?" Xianxia's gentle voice came from the other end. she asked patiently, but her words expressed a lot of dissatisfaction. Is it inconvenient? Mu Yanqing felt an inexplicable sense of annoyance when he heard her voice. The thought of this woman being so heartless to force Qingxue to such a state made him feel that it was unreasonable. However, he still hadn't sorted out the series of events, and he hadn't figured out how to deal with it. What's the matter? Xianxia was dissatisfied with his tone and sounded a little impatient. Hence, she became a little unhappy. Must I only call you when something's up? It's nothing. There's nothing to talk about. Mu Yanqing's attitude was very cold. Compared to his previous aloof attitude toward her, it was much more indifferent. Hence, she said with some dissatisfaction, "Where have you been these 2 days? You didn't even answer my calls. You seem very busy." How could Xianxia not know where Mu Yanqing had gone? She knew that Mu Yanqing had personally led his men to Yan City, but she did not know that he was now on the way back to the capital with Meng Qingxue. You don't have to ask so much about my whereabouts, do you? Yanqing. Xianxia was slightly dissatisfied and, at the same time, aggrieved. You're my fiancé and my future husband. No matter how unwilling you are, you can't deny this fact. As your fiancé, don't I have the right to ask about your whereabouts? Her voice fell into Meng Qingxue's ears through the receiver. She couldn't help but frown as her eyes gradually turned cold. When she found out that the 2 men were acting under her orders and that she was the culprit behind her unborn child's death, her hatred for the Missy had reached its peak. Maternal instincts dictated this. Any mother would not tolerate any sand in their eyes. They would never allow anyone to harm their own flesh and blood. Even though she did not know who Xianxia was, she was already at loggerheads with her after what had happened. At the thought of this, the corners of her lips curled up coldly. She reached out and hugged Mu Yanqing's arm. Frowning slightly, she pretended to be uncomfortable and groaned softly. On the other end of the line, Xianxia, who was holding the phone and listening to the silence for a long time, suddenly heard a woman's faint moan. It hurts. Meng Qingxue gently covered her lower abdomen with a pained expression. Yanqing. Xianxia was sure that she heard a woman's voice from the receiver. For a moment, she became nervous and immediately suspected Meng Qingxue. He's with that B*TSH. Meng Qingxue. Who else could it be if not this woman? Chapter 2753. Don't tell me that he's bringing Meng Qingxue back to the capital to nurse her pregnancy. At the thought of this possibility, an inexplicable fire ignited in her heart as she felt a great sense of crisis. Mu Yanqing. Did you hear what I said? At this moment, Mu Yanqing was a little alarmed by Meng Qingxue's weak moans of pain. However, Xianxia's stern voice on the other end of the phone made him lose his patience, and he could not help but sound a little anxious. What? Mu Yanqing, who's that woman beside you? Xianxia asked aggressively. Are you questioning me? Mu Yanqing retorted expressionlessly. It's none of your business who I'm with, right? Mind your own business and don't worry about me. With that, he looked at her worriedly. Seeing her pale face, his eyes suddenly became a little flustered. What's the matter? It hurts. Meng Qingxue's voice was more like an invisible provocation. Although it was very weak, it was still brazenly provoking Xianxia's brain. There was no need to think about who had made that sound. She could even tell that Meng Qingxue was deliberately diverting Mu Yanqing's attention while blatantly provoking her through the phone. This Meng Qingxue must know who called Mu Yanqing, so she's provoking me so arrogantly. D*Eminent. Mu Yanqing. Xianxia was so angry that the veins on her forehead were throbbing. I'm busy now. Mu Yanqing said coldly and hung up the phone. Xianxia held the phone in a daze. When she heard the busy tone from the other end, the corners of her eyes twitched violently. She was so angry that she actually smashed the phone on the ground. B*TSH. She cursed angrily. As if not venting her anger, she picked up the phone and smashed it again, as if the phone was Meng Qingxue. Is this Meng Qingxue planning to officially declare war on me? Was she trying to declare her sovereignty over her by doing this? At the thought of this, Xianxia could not suppress her anger. Her face was ashen as she clenched her fists. Suddenly, her lips curled into a bloodthirsty sneer. Fine. Meng Qingxue. Since you've declared war on me, then I'll naturally accompany you to the end. Mu Yanqing's attention was focused on Meng Qingxue after he hung up the phone. Thinking that she was in pain again, he carefully placed his large palm on her lower abdomen and anxiously said, "Hold on for a while more. We'll be in the capital soon. Once we're in the capital, I'll transfer my lower abdomen earlier, but it's better now." Meng Qingxue smiled weakly. She felt a little satisfied when he hung up on Song Enya without any hesitation. Between her and I and songs between the two, Song and Qingxue's, this man's is that. This knowledge made her somewhat elated. At the very least, he cares about me. All right, don't worry and don't be so nervous. Didn't the doctor say that I'm fine? Meng Qingxue consoled him, feeling amused. He reminded her worriedly, "If you feel unwell, tell me immediately. Don't hide anything from me." Chapter 2754. Uncle Fu brought Xiaobao Chu around the Wanbao building. The Wanbao building had a very famous children's entertainment place called Laji Children's King. There were many game machines that were suitable for Xiaobao to play. Chu Xiaobao had never seen such a bustling building before, let alone such a bustling place. Laji Children's King sold products for infants aged 0 to 13, including clothes, milk powder, calcium tablets, and toys. Chu Xiaobao, who was originally in a very low mood, was immediately attracted by the many toys displayed in Laji Children's King when he stepped into the shop. For a moment, he was like a little mouse that had fallen into a rice jar, and all his unhappiness was thrown to the back of his mind. "Uncle, look, look!" Chu Xiaobao ran in front of a whack-a-mole game machine, and his eyes lit up. "What is this?" Uncle Fu walked over and squatted down beside him, and then patiently said, "This is a game machine. Do you see these little mice?" After a pause, Uncle Fu smiled and picked up a small red hammer that was hanging at the side. He handed it to him and explained, "When the game starts, these little mice's heads will pop out of the holes. At this time, you have to use the small hammer in your hand to hit the little mouse's head hard. This way you can get 1 point. Wah! Xiao Bao's eyes seemed to have countless little stars surging. It seemed very fun. Chu Xiao Bao's eyes were filled with anticipation. Then does this game require money to play? Although the little guy was still young, he already had the concept of money. He already knew that when he was outside, there were many things that required money. However, his mother had told him before that he could not simply spend other people's money. Therefore, he did not mention that he wanted to play. Instead, he looked at the flashing red light of the game machine with a yearning look on his face. Uncle Fu could tell what he was thinking. He smiled knowingly and immediately called the shop assistant over. He then paid for the coins and returned to the game machine with the coins. He saw that Xiao Bao was still holding the small hammer and staring at this extremely novel toy, so he deliberately teased him. "Xiao Bao, do you want to play?" Xiao Bao nodded heavily without any defense, but suddenly thought of something and said carefully, "This game costs money. Forget it. I'm just looking, not playing." "Here." Uncle Fu opened his palm. Xiao Bao looked over and saw a few coins lying quietly in his palm. He was surprised. "What are these?" "Coins. As long as you put in the coins, you can play." Once he heard that he could play the game, Xiao Bao could not help but be excited. His face was flushed with excitement and yearning. He asked tentatively, "Can I really play?" Of course." Uncle Fu smiled knowingly and then put a coin into the terminal. After a while, the screen showed "Start." He gently urged, "Xiao Bao, the game has started." Xiao Bao immediately raised the small hammer in his hand and smashed it heavily on the little mouse's head that popped out of the hole. Squeak, squeak. The little mouse let out a scream and retreated back into the hole. So fun. So fun. Chapter 2755. It was Xiao Bao's first time playing, so his reflexes were not particularly nimble. Although he used a lot of strength, he was sometimes too nervous and could not perform well. Several times, he missed his target. Uncle Fu also became nervous and kept pointing out the mountains and rivers. "Quickly hit that side. Over there, over there. Here." Baby Chu panted as he hammered away at the wall with his small hammer. Uncle Fu watched from the side and couldn't help but sigh silently in his heart. Thinking about the old master when he was young, he still remembered that when Jinglian was 6 years old, they went to the commercial street to play. At that time, There was a huge pirate ship in the middle of the commercial street. At that time, Gu Jinglian was young. At the age of 6, he was really at his most playful age. He clamored to play. However, as the future successor of the Gu family, the family had extremely high hopes for Gu Jinglian. As the eldest son of the Gu family, Gu Jinglian's every word and action were strictly controlled. At the age of 4, he had already started receiving strict training. Shooting, karate, jujitsu. He still remembered the first time he went to the shooting range. Little Jinglian threw a tantrum because he did not like such a serious occasion. In the end, his strict father threw him into the detention room as punishment. For the entire night, he knelt in the detention room and was not allowed to get up. The next morning, it was Uncle Fu who personally carried him back to his room. He had already lost all feeling in his knees and was unable to stand. From then on, his personality changed drastically. He was no longer as energetic as a normal child. His personality also became increasingly gloomy, and he did not like to get close to anyone. At the age of 6, Gu Jinglian had already seen countless bloody scenes with his father. Once at the casino, the 6-year-old Gu Jinglian watched helplessly as a gambler who cheated had his hands crippled by the casino's hired thugs. The ground was covered in blood, but there was no fear on his young face. It was as if this was a normal scene. Uncle Fu looked at Xiao Bao and sighed. At the end of the round, the little guy was sweating profusely, but he only got 10 points. The shop assistant stood to the side and watched. Chu Xiao Bao's serious expression as he played the game was too funny. She couldn't help but ask, "Little friend, is this your first time playing?" Chu Xiao Bao nodded in a daze and looked at her shyly. The shop assistant explained, "If you can clear the game and break the record, you have a chance to win a heavyweight prize." Chu Xiao Bao's eyes seemed to be filled with countless little stars as he asked excitedly, "What's the prize?" The shop assistant pointed at the rules of the game and briefly introduced them. The final record was 100 points. Uncle Fu looked at it carefully. If he could break the record, he would be able to get the latest AI robot developed by Luji Holdings. It was a global limited edition. However, there was a prerequisite. Parents could not give any help in this game. The child had to break the record with his own strength in order to win the prize. Uncle Fu and Xiao Bao talked about this. Chu Xiao Bao clenched his fists and looked determined to win. "I will work hard and win the prize." He looked like a tiger eyeing its prey with ambition in his eyes. Uncle Fu stayed by his side and was responsible for putting in the coins for him. He silently watched over him. Halfway through the game, the police station called. Chapter 2756. Thus, he walked to the side and picked up the phone. On the other end of the line, the deputy bureau chief sounded worried and conflicted. "The diagnosis report is out. It's basically confirmed." When Fu Bo heard this, he frowned slightly. "Are you sure? There can't be any mistakes. As long as there's no problem with the sample you provided, it's basically confirmed." Fu Bo couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. In the end, they couldn't be bothered to play games anymore. Uncle Fu carried Chu Xiao Bao back to the Gu family in a hurry, and immediately asked about Gu Jinglian's whereabouts. His subordinate reported that Gu Jinglian had just left to survey the territory. The Gus intended to invest in a piece of land to build a financial center. That piece of land was what Gu Jinglian had liked previously. He had bought it through an auction. The area wasn't particularly prosperous, but the rail transportation was very convenient. In the future, when it was developed into a financial street, it would have great prospects. "Did Old Master say when he'll be back?" That person shook his head. "No, Old Master didn't say anything." Uncle Fu frowned and carried Xiao Bao to the seat beside him. He paced back and forth a few times and suddenly asked, "Ahi, you've been following Old Master all this time. Have you ever found out what kind of women he has around him?" Ahi looked at him in a daze. He obviously didn't understand why he had thrown this question out of the blue. "Uncle Fu, why are you suddenly asking this?" "There's a reason why I'm asking you this. You just have to answer." Ahi said doubtfully. "It doesn't seem appropriate to discuss Old Master's private matters in private, right? Old Master hates this the most. If he finds out that I'm talking too much, wouldn't it be?" "Don't worry. Just say it. You don't have to worry about what happens after that." Ahi rubbed his chin and recalled. Then he sighed helplessly. "Old Master has a lot of women around him. Ai said. Uncle Fu didn't give up and asked, "How many are close to him?" "Not many." Ai shrugged and said calmly, "Master has many women around him, but he doesn't have a close relationship with any of them. Most of it happened in one night." "Uncle Fu, you know it too." Master didn't care about women at all. Even if he had a lot of women, it was just a biological need. He's a man after all. Moreover, you also know that old Master doesn't believe in marriage. He said that he won't marry. Therefore, his marriage has always been a sore point for the entire family. Aren't there any special exceptions? Ai shook his head. No. Fu Bo sighed. He felt that he couldn't make sense of the situation. Ai glanced at his expression, but tactfully did not ask further. An hour later, Gu Jinglian actually came back. He went to investigate the scene and saw that there were no major problems, so he went back home. As soon as he returned to the Gu family, the first question he asked was, "Did you send that brat back?" However, his subordinate reported that Uncle Fu had just brought that little fellow back to the Gu family. "Call that old man over." Gu Jinglian felt a wave of annoyance in his heart. He casually pulled at his collar and went upstairs. Uncle Fu hurried to the study. Gu Jinglian went straight to the point and questioned him, "Why did you bring that brat back again?" Chapter 2757. The police station verified it again. They used your hair and the blood samples collected from Xiao Bao Chu for a paternity test. The final report showed that you and Chu Xiaobao are related. What? Gu Jinglian found it hard to accept such a conclusion. He stood up in shock and stared at him with a gloomy expression. "Where did you get the hair?" "On your pillow." The doctor said that fortunately, there were hair follicles left in your hair. Therefore, such a test report is valid. Gu Jinglian's expression froze for a moment. He frowned slightly. "Don't joke about such things." "Old Master, how could I joke about such things?" Uncle Fu said with an aggrieved expression. "The truth is right in front of us. From the first time I saw this child, I had some suspicions. Old Master, didn't you notice? This child looks a lot like you. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility of some kind of coincidence. However, this child's facial features are not only similar to yours. Even the expression he sometimes shows is extremely similar to yours. What confirmed my suspicions was the news from the police station that day. They collected Xiao Bao Chu's DNA and compared it with the national gene pool. In the end, the only match that matched him was you." "What?" Gu Jinglian felt that this was simply a fantasy. There were countless jaw-dropping coincidences in the world. But it was hard to imagine that such a coincidence would fall on his head. So, Xiao Bao Chu was his child? How could it be? No matter what kind of relationship he had with the women, he would always take strict precautions. He did not like children. In fact, it could even be said that he was sick of them. He would never let any woman have the chance to bear his child. Even if there was a fish that escaped the net, those greedy women who were pregnant with his child would definitely come knocking on his door with great fanfare. In the name of the child, they would use any means necessary to demand an astronomical amount of child support. How could they hide in such a small city with the child and secretly raise the child until he was 5 years old without alerting the Gu family? Ridiculous. Nonsense. Uncle Fu sighed. "Master, there are some things that you can't deny even if you don't admit it. Chu Xiaobao must be your flesh and blood." Gu Jinglian suddenly looked at him deeply, then curled his lips coldly and said, "This report doesn't count if I'm not present. Unless you do it again and I see the results with my own eyes. Only then will I believe you." Uncle Fu said, "Master, if you want, you can go to the hospital for a detailed test right away." Before he could finish, there was a small movement at the door. Gu Jinglian sensed that someone was eavesdropping at the door. He shouted coldly, "Who's at the door?" "Ah!" A tender voice came from the door. Chu Xiaobao stood at the door with an aggrieved expression. He nervously pinched the corner of his clothes. Just now, he had secretly followed behind Uncle Fu. He didn't dare to go in, so he hid at the door and eavesdropped. However, he couldn't understand what they were talking about. She could vaguely hear that this annoying bad uncle seemed to be yelling at Uncle Fu. Chapter 2758. Gu Jinglian saw his guilty look and frowned. "Why are you hiding at the door?" I? Chu Xiaobao stammered for a while and suddenly said, "Don't blame Uncle. I'll definitely return the money he used to buy clothes for me when I grow up and earn money. What did he mean? Gu Jinglian was baffled by her words. Uncle Fu's heart warmed. So this little guy was worried that he would be scolded by old master for spending money on him, so he secretly followed him. Although there was some misunderstanding, this child's kindness still warmed his heart. Gu Jinglian was a little impatient, but for some reason, he couldn't help but take a few more glances at this little guy. He saw him standing there with a wronged and indignant expression, pinching the corner of his shirt and looking at him uneasily. Suddenly, he sat back at the table and waved at him. Come here. What? Come here. Xiao Bao was a little shocked. This bad uncle was calling him. But he looked so fierce. Was he going to scold him? With such a fearful heart, Xiao Bao didn't dare to move forward for a while. Uncle Fu saw that he seemed to be very afraid of Gu Jinglian and smiled helplessly. Then he said, Xiao Bao, uncle is calling you over. But don't be afraid. I'm here, aren't I? Uncle Fu encouraged him. Xiao Bao bit his lip. Then he mustered up his courage and slowly walked over to Gu Jinglian. He stood still and lowered his head guiltily, not even daring to look at him. Gu Jinglian scrutinized him carefully, from his eyebrows to his small nose and exquisite facial features. He looked at every detail carefully. He couldn't help but reach out his hand. However, before he could touch him, his sudden movement startled the little guy. Xiao Bao saw him suddenly reach out his hand from the corner of his eye, and thought that this bad uncle was going to hit him. He was so frightened that he immediately hugged his head and squatted on the ground, crying out loud. Don't hit me. Gu Jinglian's lips instantly twitched. Who wanted to hit him? Why did this little guy become so timid? In the beginning, he had been wandering alone in the wilderness for so long, but he had never seen him cry. He had even been so bold as to climb into his car. Why had he become so timid now? He had only reached out his hand, and he had already been scared to this extent. Uncle Fu wanted to laugh, but his heart ached at the same time. It was probably because of Gu Jinglian's harsh words that night that the little guy was scared out of his wits. Hence, when he stood in front of Gu Jinglian, he could not help but feel paranoid and jittery. Xiao Bao, be good. Uncle isn't going to hit you. Xiao Bao raised his head. There were still a few drops of tears on his face. Seeing that Gu Jinglian was staring at him coldly, as if he really didn't want to hit him and didn't look as fierce as he remembered, Xiao Bao stood up, trembling all over, but his shoulders were still trembling. Uncle, you said not to hit me. The little guy said sobbingly. Gu Jinglian took a deep breath to calm his emotions. He deliberately eased his tone and said lightly, Come here. Let uncle take a good look at you. Woo! Xiao Bao was a little unwilling. Uncle Fu saw this and gently pushed him from behind. Only then did Xiao Bao pout and walk in front of Gu Jinglian. He raised his head but didn't dare to look into his eyes. Chapter 2759. Gu Jinglian looked at him up close and reached out his hand. His slender fingers slowly caressed every inch of his facial features. His fingertips gently rubbed his brows and eyes, and he couldn't help but stare blankly. He hadn't looked at him seriously before, but now that he was looking at him up close, he suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Uncle Fu was suspicious. This child did look like him when he was young. But his child? Was it possible? Then who was his mother? Uncle, why do you keep staring at me? Xiao Bao tilted his head and asked, puzzled. Gu Jinglian was silent. Behind him, Uncle Fu smiled and said, Xiao Bao, haven't you always said that you want to find your father? Xiao Bao turned around and exchanged glances with Uncle Fu. He nodded vigorously. Yeah. Xiao Bao didn't have a father since he was young. Mommy doesn't know where Daddy is either, but Mommy said that Xiao Bao has a father. It's just that they were temporarily separated for some reason. Xiao Bao has always wanted to find his father. Uncle Fu asked deliberately, if you really find your father, are you willing to acknowledge him? Yes. Xiao Bao nodded vigorously. If I can find my father, of course I'm willing to acknowledge him. Because he's my father. Without my father, there wouldn't be a Xiao Bao. Uncle Fu smiled in relief. He walked forward and picked him up. Then he gestured, Xiao Bao, Uncle will tell you a secret, okay? Okay. Xiao Bao went forward. Uncle Fu leaned close to his ear and whispered, Your father is right in front of you. What do you mean? Xiao Bao couldn't wrap his head around it for a while. Uncle Fu gestured with his eyes. This uncle is your father. The afternoon sun was glaring and vicious. Even though it was only April, the weather was gradually turning hot. There seemed to be no transition between winter and summer as it quietly arrived without warning. Mu Yanqing and his entourage arrived in the capital. According to the clues and coordinates provided by Luo Qing, they quickly found the exact location. Just as the clues provided by them were, there was indeed a very well-hidden industrial area in the suburbs. This industrial area was built in the last century. They found the warehouse, and when they walked over, they saw breadcrumbs and broken chairs scattered on the ground. Chu Ho walked over and squatted on the ground. She gently rubbed the breadcrumbs. She walked over to the broken chair and looked at it. The chair was made of solid wood. After years of being exposed to the wind and sun, many parts of the warehouse were already moldy and decayed. It could be easily broken with a gentle twist. Luo Qing said that the warehouse is very humid, so they used a chair to tie baby Chu up. From the looks of it, it should be here, she said. Chu Ho frowned and said slowly, but Xiao Bao isn't here. Where could he have gone? Could Song Enya have brought him back? Meng Qingxue asked worriedly. Impossible. Mu Yanqing said, since this child isn't the one she wants, she won't take the risk to bring him back. After all, it won't do her any good to harm a child. She won't do anything to Xiao Bao. A woman like her is ruthless. What won't she do? Meng Qingxue said hatefully. Chapter 2760. Chu Ho suddenly stood up, turned around, and looked around before saying calmly, Xiao Bao should be fine. Mu Yanqing was stunned. What do you mean? Meng Qingxue was surprised to hear this. Chu Ho, how can you be so sure? Did you see this chair? Chu Ho kicked the wreckage of the chair on the ground expressionlessly and said slowly, didn't Luo Qing say that they left after tying Xiao Bao to the chair? I looked at the scene and didn't see any signs of an intense fight. I originally thought that Xiao Bao had been taken away by that woman. However, when I saw this chair, I could infer that that woman was probably like Luo Qing and Luo Hao. She didn't care about the child and just left. Meng Qingxue walked to Chu Ho's side and looked down at the chair on the ground. It seemed to have suffered a huge impact and was broken into pieces. She was a little puzzled. What happened to this chair? Do you see it? The chair is broken and broken into pieces, but do you see here? There are traces of handcuffs here. Judging from these traces, the little guy was probably tied to the chair and wanted to escape, so he dragged the chair to the wall. Then, he turned his back and slammed into the wall to break the chair. This chair looks very sturdy, but after being exposed to the wind and sun for so many years, coupled with being soaked in water, it has long rotted and broken. Maybe the little guy was left here alone and thought of this way to get away. After Chu Ho explained in detail, Meng Qingxue came to a realization. I understand what you mean. In other words, Xiao Bao didn't get into an accident. That's true, but that might not be the case. Chu He frowned. She turned around, walked to the door, and looked around. This was the suburbs, remote and desolate. Even if she could escape from here, she was only a 5-year-old child. How could she leave this place on her own? After arriving in the capital, Chu Ho noticed along the way that this place was barren and there was no sign of human habitation. Even an adult would have to walk for 3 days and 3 nights to leave such a desolate place. With Xiao Bao's leg strength, there was no way he could walk out of here. Chu Ho frowned and clenched her fists tightly. For a moment, she felt a little lost. She wanted to find Xiao Bao, but she did not know how to do it. In the huge capital, finding a child was like finding a needle in a haystack. She did not dare to think in a bad way, but it was not that she was not worried that Xiao Bao might have encountered an accident in this wilderness. If it were any other woman, she would probably be so helpless that she would break down in despair and wail at this time, but Chu Ho did not. Meng Qingxue said, why don't we call the police? Call the police? Mu Yanqing snorted. Haven't you seen the efficiency of the police? Call the police? There won't be any clues at all. But it's better than just sitting there and not doing anything. Meng Qingxue, however, disagreed. What if baby Chu meets a kind-hearted person on his way out and sends him to the police station to file a report? Who knows, we might be able to get some leads by calling the police. Chapter 2761. Chu Ho also silently agreed with this suggestion. Even if Xiao Bao had really met with an accident, they could still get news from him by calling the police. If there was no news, it would probably be the best news. In short, they should contact the local police station first and file a record. What if there was a lead? With such hope, Chu Ho picked up her phone and dialed the police station's number. After connecting to the police station, she recorded Xiao Bao's basic characteristics and some information, waiting for a slim chance of survival. Just as the group was driving towards the city center, Chu Ho suddenly received a call from the police station. "Hello, are you Miss Chu? I'm from the Jianghu District Public Security Bureau. Previously, the call center received a report from you saying that your son was missing. The name you provided was Xiaobao Chu, right?" "Yes." Hearing this, Chu Ho was a little excited. She held the phone tightly and asked, "Excuse me, is there any news from your side?" "Oh, it's like this. This name was not found in the Household Registration Center. However, I checked online. Previously, the Shangguan Public Security Bureau also received a report that a child was missing and entrusted to the Public Security Bureau to find his family. However, 10 minutes ago, the family called to close the case. Apparently, the child has already found his family." "What?" Chu Ho's expression froze for a moment. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted together. "Officer, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." "How could it be?" Chu Ho was a little unsteady on her feet. For a moment, many doubts arose in her mind. She clenched her teeth tightly and said with difficulty, "Could it be a false claim?" She had seen on the news that some criminals would pretend to be the child's family and claim the child. Previously, there was such a blunder in Sea City. Due to the negligence of a few police officers at the Public Security Bureau, the child was falsely claimed by an unrelated stranger and was then abducted and sold to a remote mountain area. Fortunately, it was discovered in time, and through the police station's surveillance cameras, they had a detailed picture of the child's facial features. The police officer immediately said, "That's impossible." The information on the case said that the child and his family had undergone a DNA test and confirmed that they were related. That's why the case was closed. Chu Ho's face suddenly turned ugly. "However, we can't rule out the possibility that it's a coincidence of names. After all, other than providing names and general information, you didn't provide any other strong clues. Is it convenient for you to come to the police station now? Collect DNA information and then do a detailed investigation. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. However, please rest assured that the DNA information of the child is basically consistent with his father's. If the blood relationship is not confirmed, we can't just close the case casually." Chu Ho hung up the phone with a complicated look on his face. For a moment, it was as if there were countless inexplicable threads crazily rushing to the center of his eyebrows, giving him a splitting headache. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows, but her forehead had unknowingly started to sweat. Meng Qingxue saw that she looked terrible and couldn't help but walk up to her worriedly. She asked anxiously, "Chu Ho, is there any news from Xiao Bao?" Chapter 2762. The police said that there was indeed a child named Chu Xiao Bao, who got lost and was sent to the Public Security Bureau. However, after an investigation, his family members claimed him and the case was closed. "Family members?" Meng Qingxue was shocked. "How is that possible?" "I think it's very strange too. This is simply a fantasy," Chu Ho said. Mu Yanqing said from the side, "It's useless to say so much now. Calm down. We might as well go to the police station to take a look. It's better than being flustered here." For the first time, Chu Ho did not refute and only nodded. The car drove toward the Jianghu District Public Security Bureau. The Jianghu District Public Security Bureau was not far from the highway intersection. The intersection of the highway intersection and the provincial road was the only road that led to the suburbs, which was the abandoned industrial area. Jianghu District was in charge of the jurisdiction of this area. Therefore, after 20 minutes, Chu Ho arrived at the police station. Mu Yanqing was in charge of parking the car while Meng Qingxue followed closely behind Chu Ho into the police station. The police officer in charge of the case received them. The police officer had already printed out the documents for the record and explained it concisely. "That child is 120 centimeters tall and looks very delicate. He's about 5 years old. As the Household Registration Center couldn't find his file, he probably wasn't registered on the household register. Just 3 days ago, a middle-aged man brought him to the police station to report a case. He said that the child was lost and asked the police to find his family members. However, after searching hard, they couldn't find any information about the child. After that, the child's DNA was collected and sent to the DNA database for comparison. 3 days ago. Chu Ho frowned. The timing was basically the same. But where was Xiao Bao before the case was reported? Where was the child found? Chu Ho asked. The police officer shook his head and said, "He didn't say." The person who reported the case only said that he accidentally picked him up on the road. At that time, it was very late and the child was alone on the road in the suburbs. He seemed to have gotten lost from his family. Then, didn't you say that you collected the child's DNA and sent it to the database for comparison? Chu Ho paused and asked nervously, "Did you get any results?" The police officer only said, "There are no notes on the details." They only said that the child's father had been found and brought the child home. The case has been closed. "That's my child," Chu Ho said confidently. "If it's really as described in this case, then all the characteristics are consistent, and the time of disappearance is also consistent, then that child is my son. His name was Xiao Bao Chu. Officer, can you help me find my child? It's naturally impossible to rely on your one-sided statement. Is it convenient for you to do a DNA test? If the information matches, we'll take you to the child." Chu Ho gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. He forced himself to calm down and asked, "Then, the premise is that if something goes wrong and the man is not related to the child, can the child's safety be guaranteed?" "The child's safety will definitely be guaranteed. Don't worry about that." "Okay." Chu Ho nodded. "Then I'll try my best to cooperate with you." "Don't worry. As long as you cooperate with us to collect the DNA information, we'll give you a reply immediately." Chapter 2763. On the other side, Xiao Bao, who also felt that this world was extremely mysterious, stood in front of Gu Jinglian in a daze. His eyes were dull and his face was full of doubt. He looked at Gu Jinglian, then carefully looked at Uncle Fu. It took him a long time to digest Uncle Fu's words. He looked at Gu Jinglian again, his eyes full of doubt and fear. He couldn't help but walk in front of Uncle Fu and grumble, "Uncle, this joke isn't funny at all. How can this bad uncle be my father?" Uncle Fu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He squatted down, held his shoulder, and said very seriously, "Xiao Bao, Uncle isn't joking with you. This is your father? He doesn't look like my father at all." Feeling aggrieved, Baby Chu pinched the corner of his shirt tightly, clearly unwilling to do so. No matter how he looked at it, this uncle was bad. He was like a demon king, black-bellied and terrifying. Just one look was enough to make one's hair stand on end and shudder. In his imagination, his father was an extremely imposing figure. He was tall, gentle, handsome, and made people feel very safe. However, this uncle seemed to have a handsome and tall image. He was satisfied, but this gentleness. His temper was obviously very bad. Moreover, he was fierce and glared at him viciously. He was not gentlemanly at all. Naturally, he couldn't accept this fact. Similarly, Gu Jinglian felt extremely awkward. A little child had appeared out of nowhere. All kinds of evidence proved that this 5-year-old kid in front of him was his flesh and blood. For a moment, he was a little confused and gloomy. He didn't have the awareness of a father at all. When it came to children, other than annoyance and disgust, he didn't have any patience. Therefore, even though the entire Gu family had great enthusiasm and hope for his lifelong happiness, to him, he didn't believe in marriage. It was just that he didn't want children. However, this little kid fell from the sky and was pushed in front of him by Uncle Fu to call him father. He panicked and was at a loss for some reason. He was already feeling conflicted. Looking at Xiao Bao, he was also looking at him awkwardly. He was also very unwilling to acknowledge this father of his. The father and son stood face to face. The awkwardness between them was exactly the same. Gu Jinglian snorted, still in disbelief. He suddenly said, "How can my son be so stupid?" Xiao Bao Chu heard him. Not only did he hear it, but he also understood it. He was so angry that his little face twisted. He glared at him fiercely and put his hands on his hips in defiance. Then he pouted and glared at him. He said arrogantly, "My father can't be so fierce. I won't admit that you're my father. His face was full of disdain. The repulsion in his eyes was even more obvious. Gu Jinglian was furious and glared at him. If Chu Xiaobao Chu wasn't used to his cold and threatening gaze, he would have been trembling in fear. However, after these 2 days of interaction, he had gotten used to Gu Jinglian's bad temper. He also gradually got used to his cold expression. He was no longer afraid. Instead, he raised his eyebrows and said provocatively, "Why are you glaring at me? You don't want to acknowledge me, but I don't want to acknowledge you." Humph. You. Chapter 2764. Gu Jinglian was so angry that he was at a loss for words. He cussed fiercely in his heart. Brat. He had learned how to be fierce with his mouth. Uncle Fu immediately gave Gu Jinglian a look. He squatted down and patiently coaxed and coaxed. "Xiaobao, didn't you say that you really wanted a father? Now that you've found a father, why are you saying that you don't want one anymore?" "He's not the kind of father I want," Xiaobao said angrily. "Besides, not only does this uncle look fierce, he obviously doesn't like me at all. Why should I stick my warm buttocks to his cold face?" Pfft. Stick my warm buttocks to his cold face? Uncle Fu couldn't help but be amused by Xiaobao's innocent and amusing behavior. As Xiaobao complained, he looked at Gu Jinglian with a resentful gaze, as if he was silently mocking him with his eyes. Gu Jinglian wasn't a good-natured person. He threatened, "If you look at me again, do you believe that I'll dig your eyeballs out?" Xiaobao immediately pursed his lips and shrank back behind Uncle Fu. His 2 little hands grabbed the corner of Uncle Fu's shirt in fear. However, he relied on Uncle Fu's presence and was certain that Gu Jinglian wouldn't dare to do anything to him. He continued to provoke him. "Dig if you can." "Humph. Big baddie. I won't be threatened by you. Xiaobao is a brave man. I'm not afraid." Gu Jinglian smiled mischievously. He strode over to Uncle Fu and suddenly reached out. He grabbed Xiaobao's collar and pulled him over. "Ah!" Chu Xiaobao cried out in alarm. Before he could dodge, and before Uncle Fu could stop him, Gu Jinglian had already lifted him up. Coincidentally, Uncle Fu had specially bought a pair of suspenders for Xiaobao today. Gu Jinglian's strength was frightening. With just a little bit of force, he grabbed his collar and lifted him up easily. Gu Jinglian looked straight at him. His eyes were cold and sharp, as if they were going to devour his soul. Chu Xiaobao swallowed nervously. However, he saw Gu Jinglian's lips curl into a cold smile. He said coldly, "Look at you. You're so arrogant. Do you really think I don't dare?" Chu Xiaobao's shoulders couldn't help but tremble. He didn't dare to struggle. He just bit his trembling lips tightly, and his eyes gradually moistened. He probably knew that he was afraid. He really thought that Gu Jinglian was a man of his word, and that he wasn't just bluffing. But even though he was afraid, so afraid that his whole body was trembling, Chu Xiaobao still pretended to be brave and clenched his fists. His teary eyes tried hard to widen as he stared at Gu Jinglian. Even though tears kept rolling in his eyes, he tried hard to force himself to not show any cowardly expression in front of Gu Jinglian. Instead, he pretended to be calm and said, "I'm not afraid. You're taller than me and stronger than me. You can bully me, and I can't beat you. But I won't beg you for mercy, and I won't be afraid. Because Mom said that Xiaobao is the bravest child." After saying that, Chu Xiaobao clenched his fists even tighter. His expression was solemn as if he was facing death calmly. However, no matter how hard he tried to show how majestic his spirit was, his trembling voice still betrayed him in the end. "You're afraid," Gu Jinglian said lightly. Chapter 2765. Chu Xiaobao snorted coldly and flashed his clenched fists as if to show off his strength. "I'm not afraid. Didn't you say you were going to gouge out my eyes? Just do it. I won't beg for mercy, and I won't cry out in pain." Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. Then, he moved his shoulders and raised his hand slightly. Unexpectedly, his simple action of raising his hand completely frightened Xiaobao, who was on the verge of panic. He finally couldn't suppress the fear in his heart. He covered his eyes tightly with both hands and gritted his teeth. Tears of fear flowed continuously through the gaps between his fingers and rolled down his face. However, he gritted his teeth and tried hard not to cry out loud. His trembling shoulders silently betrayed the fear in his heart at that moment. Uncle Fu couldn't stand it anymore. He immediately walked forward and snatched the child from Gu Jinglian's hands. He was a little angry. "Old master, Xiao Bao is still young. You can't scare him like this. The child is so young. He can't be scared at all. Isn't he very stubborn?" Gu Jinglian disagreed. "Since he's my son, how can he be so pretentious?" "Old master," Uncle Fu said helplessly, "don't you feel sorry for Xiao Bao?" Gu Jinglian glanced at him. His gaze was unreadable. "Feel sorry for him?" Uncle Fu was about to say something, but on second thought, Old Master's reaction was only because he wasn't mentally prepared for his son. Men were different from women. A woman's latent maternal instincts would be immediately aroused by the birth of a child. However, men were different. Gu Jinglian was even more so. Since he was young, his concept of family was very weak. Moreover, he didn't have any feelings for this child. He was no different from a stranger. It was indeed ridiculous for him to immediately acknowledge this child from the bottom of his heart. His indifferent reaction couldn't be more normal. Uncle Fu asked seriously, "Old master, what do you plan to do with this child?" Gu Jinglian sized him up and said indifferently, "It's up to you." "In that case, can we keep Xiao Bao in the Gu family?" Uncle Fu's eyes lit up. Chu Xiao Bao seemed to have understood something. His whole body trembled as he said, "I don't want to. Xiao Bao, I don't want to be with this uncle. He's a bad guy. He's not my father. He wants to dig out my eyes. He's a demon king. Great demon king." After Chu Xiao Bao shouted herself hoarse from complaining, she could no longer hold back her grievances and sobbed, "I want to go home. I miss my mother. I want my mother. Well, I want to go home. Xiao Bao." Chu Xiao Bao didn't listen to any of Uncle Fu's kind words at all. He rubbed his eyes pitifully with his little hands and cried sadly. Actually, from the first time he met Gu Jinglian, Xiao Bao liked this uncle from the bottom of his heart. At that time, Gu Jinglian took him to eat KFC. His heart was filled with anticipation. If such a handsome and nice uncle was his biological father, how happy would he be? Ever since he was born, he didn't have a father. His yearning for a father was definitely not a simple fantasy. However, a child's heart was delicate and extremely sensitive. During this period of time together, he deeply understood that this uncle didn't like him. Moreover, he really hated him. Chapter 2766. Chu Xiaobao felt wronged. He didn't want his father anymore. As long as he had his mother, that would be enough. Just as he lowered his head, sobbing and feeling extremely sad and lonely, his helpless appearance finally touched the only soft spot in Gu Jinglian's heart. He actually didn't want to acknowledge this child who appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't mentally prepared for a child who appeared out of nowhere and claimed to be his son. He didn't want to acknowledge and accept it. But blood was thicker than water. After all, he was his own flesh and blood. Gu Jinglian wasn't cold to the point of being heartless, especially when he saw Xiao Bao's teary eyes. A taut string in his mind finally snapped. It seemed that because of his helpless appearance, his heart finally softened. Thus, he reached out his large palm and gently rubbed Chu Xiao Bao's neat bangs. "Don't cry." He was a little helpless. He looked at Xiao Bao and frowned. He wanted to comfort him like a father, but because of his pride, he couldn't bring himself to do so. However, it wasn't right for this child to cry like this. If he didn't restrain him, he reckoned that he wouldn't be able to have a peaceful night. Forget it. Why should he lower himself to the same level as a child? Should he coax him a little? But how could he coax a child? He was a new official, and didn't have any experience. Gu Jinglian looked at Xiao Bao gloomily for a long time. After deliberating for a while, he said this with an awkward expression. "Don't cry. Don't you know that you look ugly when you cry?" Baby Chu blinked his teary eyes and suddenly cried even louder with a loud "Wah!" How was this coaxing a child? Uncle Fu broke out in cold sweat. He said, "Master, this isn't how you coax a child. If you say this, the child will only cry more sadly." Gu Jinglian's expression was awkward for a moment. Then he glared at him coldly. "Who's coaxing him? I just feel that his crying is annoying." Uncle Fu's lips twitched violently. He could tell that Gu Jinglian was not without a trace of heartache. Although he said that he was annoyed by baby Chu's cries, it was definitely not that he did not feel any heartache. However, Gu Jinglian had always been so arrogant and unyielding. It was absolutely impossible for him to bow his head to a child. Uncle Fu sighed. Hence he carried the crying child to Gu Jinglian and said sternly, "Master, please hug him." Gu Jinglian looked at baby Chu in disgust, who was nestled in Butler Fu's arms and crying pitifully with tears and snot all over his face. His forehead turned green. To him, even though he was usually able to call the wind and summon the rain, no matter how troublesome the matter was, it couldn't compare to standing in front of a child at this moment. The child was such a fragile little thing. His entire body was soft and chubby. He was like a glassware that would break easily with a drop. He didn't even know where to pick him up. "Master, children are very easy to coax. Just hug and coax him, and he won't cry anymore. Xiao Bao is still young. You can't be fierce to him. Since you're Xiao Bao's father, then you should at least take up the responsibility of a father." Responsibility of a father. Chapter 2767. Chu Xiaobao realized that he had already left Uncle Fu's embrace. He looked up and saw Gu Jinglian's disdainful and gloomy eyes. His tears fell even more violently. "Boo-hoo! I don't want you to carry me." Xiaobao turned his head and reached out his small hands to Uncle Fu. He waved them continuously and pleaded, "I don't want him to carry me. Boo! I don't want him to carry me." Uncle Fu could not bear to see him like this. However, he looked at Xiaobao and knew that the most important thing now was to nurture the relationship between the father and son. Hence, he hardened his heart, turned around and strode out of the room. With a bang, the door was closed. In the huge room, only Gu Jinglian and Xiaobao were left. Xiaobao cried even more helplessly. Once Uncle Fu left, Gu Jinglian became a little unrestrained. Hearing Xiaobao's cries, he said fiercely, "If you cry again, I won't go easy on you." Although Xiaobao felt wronged and afraid, such a threat was extremely effective. He stopped crying immediately. Just now, when Uncle Fu was present, he dared to challenge Gu Jinglian because of Uncle Fu. Now that Uncle Fu had left, his only support was gone. He did not dare to be rash. With Gu Jinglian's threat, he learned to be obedient. He pursed his lips and did not make a sound. Now, there was only him and this bad uncle in the room. He had no one to rely on and no one to back him up. Hence, he should not push his luck and stop while he was ahead. Gu Jinglian did not know whether to laugh or cry at the fact that she was amenable to the soft but afraid of the hard. "You've learned your lesson." When Gu Jinglian saw that he finally stopped crying, he was naturally satisfied. He thought in his heart that he should not spoil the child. When it was time to be fierce, he should be fierce. See, with just one shout, he immediately stopped. He carried Chu Xiaobao to the sofa and sat on the side. He saw Chu Xiaobao staring at him innocently, trembling in fear as he leaned against the corner of the sofa, timidly looking at his face. Such a young child actually knew how to read people's expressions. Seeing that Gu Jinglian's face was no longer as gloomy as before, Chu Xiaobao's wildly beating heart finally calmed down. Chu Xiaobao silently thought in his heart, how can he return to his mother's side? After thinking about it, he looked at Gu Jinglian again. Crying and throwing a tantrum wouldn't work, so the little guy decided to use a stalling tactic. Thus, he pursed his lips and said carefully, "Uncle, let's make up, okay? I won't be angry with you anymore. Don't be fierce to me, okay?" Gu Jinglian glanced at him faintly and hummed, taking it as a tacit agreement to the man's suggestion of reconciliation. "Then, let's make up." As Xiao Bao said this, he reached out his little hand and clumsily wiped the tears from his face. His eyes darted around and suddenly asked tentatively, Uncle said that you're my father. Is that true? Or is he joking?" Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes slightly. He did not know what this little guy was up to. Thus, he casually crossed his legs and elegantly stretched his posture, admitting, "It's true." "No way." Chu Xiaobao naturally did not believe him. He asked suspiciously, "You're not lying to me, are you?" Chapter 2768. As he spoke, he thought to himself that although this uncle looked very handsome, he was so fierce and had such a bad personality. He definitely could not find a wife. His mother said that many men could not find a wife, so they had no choice but to buy children from human traffickers at a high price. Some of these children were abducted, and some were cheated. Therefore, he was certain that this uncle could not have children, so he lied to him and said that he was his father. Yes, that must be it. Gu Jinglian's eyes twitched when he heard this. Could not find a wife? Physically weak? Unable to have children? Could it be that this brat was implying that he had a physical defect? Baby Chu thought that he had hit the nail on the head when he saw the look on his uncle's face. Hence, he tried to console him in all seriousness. Uncle, it's actually not that embarrassing to have some physical defects. You don't have to feel inferior. Maybe there's still hope for a baby. But I can't be your son. I still have my mother. If she can't find me, she'll be worried. Gu Jinglian was speechless. Did this kid think that he was lying to him? He frowned and suddenly took out a cigarette box. He lit a cigarette and took a deep puff. Then he flicked away the ash and said calmly, "What kind of person is your mother?" Quack. The abrupt question stunned him for a moment. Didn't you say that you want to go back to your mother? Gu Jinglian continued. Why don't you tell me your mother's name and what characteristics she has? As long as I know the details, I can help you find her. Really? Xiao Bao asked excitedly. Can you really help me find my mother? Yes. That's impossible, right? Xiao Bao quickly regained his senses and looked at him suspiciously. Even the police can't find my mother. How can you? I have a way. They are useless, but I have the ability. Gu Jinglian looked at him from the corner of his eyes. Of course, if you don't want to tell me, I won't force you. He was retreating in order to advance. The reason why he asked about that woman was because he was curious about the child's mother. It was true that he had many women, but it wasn't like he couldn't count them all. If this guy could provide him with some characteristics, he might be able to think of something. Xiao Bao thought about it for a long time. Finally, his eagerness to find his mother overshadowed everything else. He hesitated for a long time before saying, My mother's name is Chu Ho. She's very tall, thin, and has short black hair. She's a police officer. However, I've heard a lot of people say that my mother wasn't born and raised in Yen City. They all said that when my mother was pregnant with me, she had an accident. 5 years ago, they rescued my mother from the river. At that time, his mother seemed to have suffered a head injury and lost all her memories. She didn't even remember her own name. The name, Chu Ho, was given to me by my mother. After a pause, the little guy continued, After I was born, my mother worked at a police station and came home very late every day. If I have to talk about some characteristics, my mother is very beautiful. She has a pair of big eyes, a high nose, and a pair of lips that are not too thin or thick. Chapter 2769. Based on the clues provided by Chu Xiaobao, Gu Jinglian formed a portrait in his mind, but he could not remember for a long time that he had been in contact with such a woman. Short hair? Just this point alone was enough to cut off all the clues. Among the women he had been with, none of them had short hair. He liked long hair, dark and waist length. Therefore, among the women he had been with, none of them had short hair. She was very tall and very thin. As a police officer, it meant that she had good skills. However, for Chu Xiaobao, the so-called very tall might not be very tall. Relatively speaking, for a child's field of vision, the concept of very tall was probably between 1.5 to 1.6 meters. The most important point was, previously, through the DNA genetic test at the police station, he could not find her in the DNA information database. This meant that this woman was an illegal resident. There were only a few reasons why she was an illegal resident. Either she had been missing for too long and her household registration had been cancelled, or she had a special identity, such as a member of the black organization, a black agent, a spy, an assassin, or an undercover agent. Wait, undercover? Suddenly, a thought flashed through Gu Jinglian's mind. He frowned. In the river of sand in his memory, a woman's cold face flashed past. Black shoulder-length hair, exquisite facial features, cold eyebrows, and a kind of boldness that ordinary women did not have. She did not have a name, only a code name, Vermilion Bird. Vermilion Bird, the highest anti-crime inspector of the Interpol. Could it be her? Gu Jinglian was not very clear about this woman's appearance, but vaguely, those exquisite eyebrows seemed to match Xiao Bao's young and tender eyebrows. Gu Jinglian was in a daze for a long time. 6 years ago, this woman was planted by his side as an undercover agent. At that time, when he first came to power, he was ambitious. In order to expand his territory, he was unscrupulous and ruthless. He offended many forces. The Gu family's power continued to expand. In the end, because of the cross-border arms sales, they even built 2 military factories in Vietnam and North America, which alarmed the Interpol. However, at that time, the Gu family had many connections in the capital. Coupled with the protection of the country's government, the Interpol could not do anything to them. At that time, Vermilion Bird was an anti-corruption inspector. She was sent on a mission to infiltrate the Gu family as a spy. She used her methods to get close to him and was ordered to carry out an assassination plan. However, because her identity was exposed and the assassination failed, the Gu family sent people to hunt her down. In the end, she managed to escape and her whereabouts became a mystery. Thinking of this, Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows. His gaze was deep and serene as he collected his thoughts. His gaze was complex. He didn't know that the woman was pregnant with his child. This woman was very powerful. Back then, when she was placed by his side, she did not reveal any flaws. Even he did not notice anything strange about her. However, 5 years ago, his whereabouts were unknown, and his whereabouts were a mystery. In this way, the characteristics of all aspects were basically consistent. He didn't expect it to be her. He thought that she was dead. Interpol also secretly searched for her for a few months, but in the end, they could only conclude that she was dead. After losing their beloved general, the Interpol secretly erased all her information for 100 years. But did she lose her memory? So, she didn't remember anything? Including her memories of him. Chapter 2770. In the police station, Chu Ho sat quietly on the bench, patiently waiting for news. Unknowingly, it was already late. Mu Yanqing settled Meng Qingxue in a hotel. Her body was still weak, and she was exhausted after a day's drive. Although she was a little worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts, Chu Ho comforted her that even if she stayed at the police station, she might not be able to make any progress. She might as well go back to the hotel to rest first. Meng Qingxue listened to her. Chu Ho waited at the police station for an entire night. The police officer clearly told her that there would not be any progress if she just waited at the police station. The DNA test would take some time. It was already so late, and the hospital had already knocked off, so there would not be any movement. The earliest they could get the DNA test report would be tomorrow morning, when the hospital went back to work. The police station would then send someone to rush them. However, Chu Ho stubbornly stayed at the police station and refused to leave. She firmly believed that she had to know Xiao Bao's whereabouts as soon as possible. Otherwise, no matter how tired she was, she would not be able to sleep in peace. It was a long night. Finally, dawn came. Chu Ho waited for several hours in torment. Finally, at 10:30 a.m., the hospital gave her a reply. The police officer brought her to the hospital and personally collected the report. When she held the report in her hand, Chu Ho looked at the words on the report, confirmed paternity. She finally could not control her surging emotions and her eyes turned red with excitement. It's Xiao Bao. He's still fine. He's still alive and well. Chu Ho was so excited that her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. She thought that he must have met with some mishap, but she had been controlling herself and did not dare to think of the worst. She was afraid that her words would really come true. However, when she learned that Xiao Bao was still alive and well, she was so surprised that she could not believe it. Officer, have you seen this report? Chu Ho handed the report to the police officer with a smile on her face. Since it's confirmed that I'm related to that child, please bring me to him immediately. Strange. The police officer held the report and muttered with a strange expression. When Chu Ho heard this, she raised her eyebrows and asked in confusion, "What's strange about it? Is this child really your biological son?" The police officer raised his hand and rubbed his chin as he narrowed his eyes. "But I contacted the Shangguan Public Security Bureau yesterday, and they replied that the child was brought back by his biological father. Since you're the child's mother, then, what's the relationship between you and the child's father? Generally speaking, no matter how abnormal the relationship between a child's mother and father was, a child's mother. In other words, even if they were divorced, the children's parents would still be able to communicate with each other. However, no matter how he looked at it, he felt that this woman's background was somewhat unusual. He bit her lip and said with some difficulty, "Actually, I don't know who the child's biological father is." "What? You don't know?" The police officer was shocked. How is that possible? No matter how careless a woman was, she would still know who the father of her child was, right? Unless it was a one-night stand. After making love with a strange man, she accidentally got pregnant and gave birth to the child. It's true. Chapter 2771. After a pause, He added, "Later, I found out that I was pregnant, but I lost all my memories of who the child was, who the father was, and what my relationship with that man was. I can't remember even the slightest bit." You didn't try hard to remember? It's no use. Ho shook her head, looking exhausted. I racked my brains, but I still couldn't remember. The doctor said that I lost my memory because my head was severely injured. There was a blood clot in my brain, and it had congealed into a blood clot that pressed on my nerves. In addition, subconsciously, I didn't want to recall that past. However, if the blood clot eventually disappeared, there was a possibility that I could regain my memory. The police officer said suspiciously, "But the strange thing was that I couldn't find any information about you in the database. Even the Household Registration Center couldn't get your file. What kind of special identity did you have in the past? So special that all the networks couldn't find out who you were?" Ho said, "I really don't remember. What my identity was, who I was, and what happened in the past, I don't care about it." As she said that, she walked in front of him and held his shoulders tightly. "I just want to see my son right now. Didn't you say that as long as the DNA report confirms our parent-child relationship, you'll be able to bring me to him?" The police officer was stunned for a moment, then nodded silently. "Calm down. Don't be agitated. Don't worry, the child is very safe. Come back to the police station with me later. I'll help you contact him and bring you to see him." "Okay." Ho smiled, and her expression finally relaxed. However, perhaps it was because she hadn't slept well for a few days, but Ho's complexion was really bad. Her eyelids were dark, and her face was ashen. There was no color in her face. He couldn't help but worry. "Do you want to have a good rest? You don't look well." "No need." Ho waved her hand. "I'm fine." The police officer was kind. "Madam Chu, if you ask me, your body is your own. You haven't slept for a few days, right? If this goes on, your body will be exhausted. Even if it's for the child, you have to take good care of your body." He sucked in a deep breath of cold air and turned around abruptly. Staring at him with bloodshot eyes, she asked, "Have you ever had a child? Do you know the pain of being separated from your own flesh and blood?" She continued to push him. The police officer stared at her blankly. Ho's shoulders heaved uncontrollably. Over the past few days, he had been scared witless, restless, and worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts. Coupled with the fact that he hadn't slept for a few days and his physical exhaustion, he vented all of his frustrations. "For the past 5 years, Xiao Bao has never left my side. He must be very scared and helpless right now. He must want to see me immediately. I miss him very much too. I'm very worried about him. No matter how much you emphasize to me that he's safe and not in danger, I also hope to appear in front of him in the next second to comfort him, protect him, and not let him be frightened. You're a police officer. What you have to do is to help me find the child immediately. Not." Ho's blood rushed to her heart. Halfway through her sentence, there was a destructive darkness in front of her, and her body swayed lightly. Chapter 2772. When Meng Qingxue heard the news, she rushed to the hospital with Mu Yanqing. When they reached the door of the ward, they pushed it open and rushed in. They saw Ho lying sickly on the bed. Her face was pale and weak, and there was no sign of life. It was as if her body was already an empty shell. Meng Qingxue rushed to the bed anxiously, only to see Ho lying on the bed. Even though she was unconscious, her brows were tightly knitted, as if she was immersed in great pain. The doctor was holding a clipboard by the bed and writing something silently. Meng Qingxue walked over and lowered her voice. She asked in a panic, "Doctor, what's wrong with her? Why does she look so weak? What's going on?" When the doctor heard this, he could not help but turn to look at them. After sizing them up for a while, he asked, Are you the patient's family members? Yes. Meng Qingxue replied without thinking. The doctor nodded. 3 hours ago, the patient was sent to the hospital. After a checkup, we found that her body is very weak. Preliminary diagnosis is that she has not had good rest for a long time and is physically exhausted. Furthermore, she has very serious anemia. Moreover, after a brain CT scan, we found that there is a large blood clot in the patient's head that is pressing on the cranial nerves. Is it very serious? Meng Qingxue asked worriedly. As the patient's family member, don't you know about her physical condition? Her condition is very serious. She needs immediate surgery to drain the blood clot. The doctor was a little surprised. Meng Qingxue shook her head. I only know that she suffered a serious head injury due to an accident and lost all her memories. The patient has amnesia? Yes. The doctor pondered for a moment before saying, it's probably because the blood clot is pressing on the nerves. I suggest immediate surgery. Meng Qingxue sucked in a breath of cold air, obviously a little shocked. Surgery? Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Don't tell me we need a craniotomy? In her impression, any surgery that required moving the brain was a craniotomy. However, such a surgery was too risky. When the time comes, a few surgical plans will be given. It also depended on the specific location of the blood clot. If it was in the brain or the internal capsule, it would definitely require a craniotomy, which was also very risky. However, if the location of the blood clot is relatively shallow, we can also perform a minimally invasive surgery to remove the hematoma through ventriculoscopy. Minimally invasive? Is it an incision on the surface of the head? The doctor nodded. Yeah, that's pretty much it. What if we don't do the surgery? There are countless possible risks, but for the time being, we can't determine the specifics. Some patients insisted on not undergoing surgery because the location of the blood clot was more dangerous. It pressed on the nerves and skull. There were also some patients who died of sudden cerebral hemorrhage. There were also cases where the blood clot slowly disappeared after more than 10 years. Everyone's physique was different, and the situations they encountered were also different. However, to be safe, surgery was still recommended. If it presses on other nerves in the future, it will be difficult to determine the unknown risk. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists, frowned slightly, and asked, how long will it take to prepare for the operation? If you are well prepared, the operation can be carried out the day after tomorrow. However, the family member's signature is required. Chapter 2773. At night, there was a sudden thunderstorm. A white light suddenly flashed outside the window, followed by a thunderclap. Chu Xiaobao was awakened from his sleep by the sound of thunder. He was so frightened that he cried out loud. Mom! He had a nightmare. He dreamed that Chu Ho was standing in front of him, but she looked like a stranger. She looked at him as if she did not know him and was a stranger. He panicked and wailed. He hugged her, but she pushed him away coldly. Mom! Xiaobao cried out in alarm, but he saw Chu Ho turn around and leave. He chased after her in fear, but the road under his feet seemed to be endless. He ran and Chu Ho walked, but he could not catch up. Mom! No matter how much he screamed, Chu Ho did not look back. He was so frightened that he did not know what to do. He chased after her desperately, but he could only watch as Chu Ho's back gradually disappeared at the end of his sight. When he was awakened from his nightmare by the sound of thunder, he was already in a cold sweat and trembling. Unknowingly, tears streamed down his face. The more Xiaobao recalled the scene in his dream, the more frightened he became. He rarely dreamed. Even if he did, he would forget everything in the dream when he woke up. However, this dream was extremely clear. Even when he woke up, it was still deeply engraved in his memory. Mom! Xiaobao cried sadly. The crying alarmed Gu Jinglian, who was reading in the study. He had the habit of reading before going to bed. When he heard the crying, he walked into the master bedroom and saw Xiaobao covering his eyes and crying bitterly. Why are you crying again? Gu Jinglian looked a little unhappy. Why was his son crying all day long? He looked so weak and frail. He was the blood of the Gu family after all. He did not inherit his courage at all. He was like a fragile glass doll. When should he bring him to gain experience? Gu Jinglian cursed silently in his heart. As soon as Chu Xiaobao saw him, He felt a great sense of security in his heart. He got up and threw himself at him. He didn't care that the two of them had an earth-shattering Cold War before. He threw himself into his arms without any scruples. Sob, sob, sob. Uncle, Mommy doesn't want me anymore. I can't catch up with her no matter how hard I try. She doesn't want me anymore. She just left me like this. When Gu Jinglian saw her throwing herself into his arms so recklessly, he felt as if a soft spot in his heart had been touched. He could not help but reach out his hand and gently stroke the back of his head as a form of consolation. Nightmares? Woo-woo. Chu Xiaobao did not have the concept of a nightmare. He only knew that this dream had shattered all his hopes. Will Mom really abandon me? Why hasn't she come to find me after so long? Is she going to abandon Xiaobao? Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows, but his voice unconsciously softened. No. Really? It's just a nightmare. Be good. Gu Jinglian stroked his hair and said, Go to sleep. Uncle, you won't abandon me, right? Xiaobao still looked at him uneasily. Gu Jinglian looked at him and was silent for a moment. Suddenly he smiled and said, I won't. In this way, Xiaobao felt inexplicably relieved. He had just carried him to the bed and covered him with the blanket when his phone suddenly rang. Chapter 2774. What? We don't have enough manpower here. Young Master Gu, you see. Trash. Gu Jinglian scolded and hung up the phone. Just as he was about to get up, he saw Xiaobao staring at him with tears in his eyes. Seeing that he was about to leave, he looked scared. Uncle, where are you going? Are you going to leave me behind too? Gu Jinglian frowned. Suddenly, he thought of something and his lips curled into a cold arc. Didn't he want to train his courage? Wasn't this the best time? Muroga Casino, the biggest casino under the Gu family. Now, there was a boiling cauldron of voices and the scene was chaotic. There were cheers and curses mixed in, and the mood was high. This was the biggest gambling den in the capital, and also the only casino in the capital that was not controlled by the government. It had always been controlled by the Gu family's Vermilion Bird Hall, and was also the territory of the Gu family's power. At this moment, in the middle of the hall, two groups of people were fighting with their weapons. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, accompanied by angry curses and roars, and the scene was chaotic. The gamblers were all crowded on the second floor in fear. Some people were injured because of the fierce conflict, but because of the chaos, they could not get out for a while. They had no choice but to cover their wounds and watch in a panic in front of the railing. Some people were already so scared that their legs were weak. They were half kneeling on the ground, and their faces were pale and colorless. Suddenly, there was a clamor from the crowd, with a sense of provocation and arrogance. It was arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Damn it! Brothers! Go! Smash it for me! Smash it for me! Take revenge for the brothers of the Green Dragon Group who died in vain. Go! At the command, the people of the Green Dragon Group all pulled out large machetes from their backs. Their faces were ferocious as they waved their machetes and rushed forward. The crowd became more and more chaotic. For a moment, there were wails, cries of pain, and sounds of fighting. At this moment, the door of the casino was suddenly kicked open by someone, accompanied by a deafening gunshot. The gunshot echoed in the hall for a long time, and the scene suddenly became strangely quiet. A group of men in black rushed in from the door, and then respectfully stood in 2 rows, bowing their heads. Then, a cold man's voice came from the door. I heard that someone is causing trouble on my territory? Just as he finished speaking, there was a sound of casual footsteps at the door, and a tall and slender figure slowly walked in. Everyone was stunned and surprised. Under the gazes of 2 rows of men in black, Gu Jinglian stood tall with his hands in his trouser pockets. His sharp eyes swept across the crowd gathered together and he let out a low chuckle. Green Dragon Group's mood. Or was it because I was not ruthless enough that you dare to stir up trouble under my watch? The man was wearing a black British long windbreaker, a pair of black trousers, and a pair of black high boots. His sharp black hair was neatly tied to his ears. He looked neat and free, and his whole body exuded an unruly aura. He was obviously a young man, but when he stood there, his every movement showed the demeanor of an emperor. It was as if he was born with an elegant and arrogant temperament. Gu Jinglian looked around at the messy scene, and the corners of his lips curved into a cold arc. Chapter 2775. From the moment he appeared, the crowd fell into a deathly silence. Everyone looked towards the door, and their hands froze in place. The people from the Green Dragon Gang were stunned. They were shocked by his imposing manner and stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move. "Young Master Gu! It's young Master Gu!" A man suddenly exclaimed in surprise and rushed out from the crowd. He quickly ran in front of her and respectfully bowed his body. He lowered his head and said loudly, "Young Master Gu, I don't know what happened today, but the Green Dragon Gang brought people to cause trouble." Before he finished speaking, Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows impatiently and kicked him to the side. The force of the blow was so strong that even the man, who had been fighting in the black streets for many years, could not withstand it. He flew a few meters away and fell to the ground, coughing up a mouthful of blood. "Useless thing!" Gu Jinglian arrogantly scolded and walked in front of him. He kicked his shoulder. The man groaned and fell to the ground, his face full of cold sweat. Gu Jinglian walked towards him and his patent leather boots stepped on his chest mercilessly. He coughed and raised his head. He saw a pair of evil eyes shining like a ghost hiding in the night, ghostly and fierce. He narrowed his eyes dangerously. The man was so scared that he hurriedly got up and knelt on the ground, trembling. His shoulders trembled violently. "I said, I don't keep useless people under me," Gu Jinglian said coldly. His amber eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of light and there was a touch of disdain in his eyes. He slowly raised his eyes and his sharp gaze swept across the crowd in front of him. His voice was like a bloodthirsty demon. "You dare to cause trouble here, so don't dream of walking out of here alive." After saying that, he raised his chin and signaled with his eyes. The door behind him was closed and locked. A group of men in black took out their pistols neatly and skillfully. The dark holes were aimed at the people from the Green Dragon Gang. At the same time, the gamblers who surrounded the railings on the second floor sucked in a sharp breath. Gu Jinglian looked up expressionlessly and pulled out a pistol from his waist. He pointed it at the crowd and curled his lips impatiently. "I'll shoot whoever makes another sound." His skin was fair and clean. His eyebrows were sword-like, and his eyes were upturned. He looked extremely devilish. His facial features were clearly so beautiful and exquisite. His delicate and pretty contours were dyed with traces of cold and sharp heroic spirit because of his cold eyes. Cries of surprise rose and fell from the group of gamblers as they retreated one after another. On the other side, the members of the Azure Dragon Group opened up a path. A burly man slowly walked in front of Gu Jinglian. This man was the leader of the Azure Dragon Group, known as Long Si. The Dragon Sect was the head of the three major Heidao clans in the capital. It was once an all-powerful clan in the capital, and its reputation spread far and wide. At that time, the Dragon Sect and the Gu family stood side by side. They were on par with each other and were feared by other clans. They once had a glorious period. However, since the young master of the Dragon Sect, Long Air, passed away 3 years ago, the Dragon Sect had declined. Their power had greatly weakened and even their status had fallen to the bottom. Chapter 2776. The Long family's bloodline was extremely weak. In the early years, because the Long family's status was unstable, Long Air's first 2 children were assassinated and persecuted. Later on, Long Air had a son. However, when Long Air passed away 3 years ago, Long Si was only 16 years old. In order to revive the Long family's prosperity and protect the Dragon Sect's status in the underworld, Long Si had no choice but to rope in other families through marriage a year ago to obtain protection. However, the prosperity of the Dragon Sect was something Gu Jinglian could not bear to see. No emperor would be willing to share the country with others. The capital was his territory. If the Dragon Sect wanted to rise, they had to ask if he could agree. Therefore, a few days ago, the Gu family gathered together and took action. In less than 3 days, they wiped out the casino and Jiangnan clubhouse that the Dragon Sect controlled. The Dragon Sect's vitality was greatly damaged. The Jiangnan clubhouse was the Dragon Sect's largest gathering place. On that night, the Dragon Sect's glorious history became a thing of the past. Long Air flew into a rage out of humiliation. Therefore, he gathered his men on this day to bring bad luck to the Gu family. Even if both sides suffered losses and perished together, he would not hesitate. "Young Master Gu, long time no see." Long Air opened his mouth, but his voice was hoarse. When he laughed, he was evil and threatening. Gu Jinglian looked around and frowned slightly. Long air sometimes, a last-ditch struggle is not a wise choice. His tone was filled with mockery. Long air flew into a rage out of humiliation and said angrily, "Cut the crap. Go go." Long air pointed at Gu Jinglian. "Kill him." The group of people behind Long air was ready to move. With a command, the group of burly men behind Long air rushed toward Gu Jinglian at lightning speed. "Gu Jinglian, tonight is the day you die." Gu Jinglian looked at the crowd rushing toward him casually and sneered. Then, he waved his coat away and gently unbuttoned his collar. "Protect young Master Gu." The dragon sex fighters rushed towards him. The man in the lead had a body of terrifying muscles, especially the bulging muscles on his arms. It was as though his clothes were about to burst. He strode over, raised his fist, and smashed it down on Gu Jinglian's face. However, in the next second, Gu Jinglian raised his hand and caught his punch. The man was shocked and looked up, only to see a cold look of contempt in Gu Jinglian's eyes. "You overestimate yourself." In the next second, Gu Jinglian twisted and broke his wrist. "Ah!" The man roared in pain. Gu Jinglian pulled out his gun and aimed it between the man's eyebrows. With a bang, he gave the man a quick death. Blood splattered all over his body, staining it red. Gu Jinglian smiled coldly, but he didn't say much. He waved his hand lightly, and his subordinates immediately swarmed forward. Gu Jinglian was famous for his ruthlessness. The Azure Dragon Gang dared to cause trouble in the Gu family's territory, so they naturally cut off their own escape route. Chapter 2777. Bang bang bang. Long Si turned pale with fright. He did not expect Gu Jinglian to be able to mobilize so many people in such a short period of time. The two sides fought fiercely, and the scene was intense. Smoke filled the air and blood flowed like a river. Tonight was destined to be a bloody night in Moroga. There were severely injured people lying on the ground. Some of them had already stopped breathing. Most of the gamblers had seen the world, but they had never seen such a grand scene. They could not help but be stunned on the spot. Some of the more timid ones were so scared that they almost peed their pants. Just as the crowd was restless, a child's loud cry suddenly came from outside the closed door. Gu Jinglian paused and silently put away his gun. He signaled to his subordinates with his eyes. As soon as the door was opened, the child's childish cries became louder and louder. A handsome young man rushed in with a crying face holding a child who looked no more than 5 years old. Gu Jinglian took a look and his eyebrows twitched. Dark clouds covered his face. Everyone looked at the child. The man was very tall, so when such a small child nestled in his chest, he looked too small. The boy was very cute. His skin was fair and tender, his hair was black, and his eyes were bright and clear. At this moment, there were sparkling tears in his eyes. However, this child was not as soft and weak as she looked. At this moment, she had a fierce expression as she bared her fangs and brandished her claws, tearing at the man's face and hair. She kicked and kicked at the man's arms with her little feet as she cried loudly. The man was called Maman, and he was one of Gu Jinglian's most trusted subordinates. Now, such a fierce man was carrying such a small child. It was a little out of place. He held up the little child's hands in front of Gu Jinglian as if he was presenting a treasure. "Boss, the young master has been crying non-stop. I can't coax him no matter how hard I try." Maman frowned in distress. Before he could say anything, Chu Xiaobao in his arms pouted his cherry-red lips and cried out twice. His teary eyes stared innocently at Gu Jinglian. That sad and pitiful look in his eyes made one feel pity for him. Gu Jinglian carried him in his arms with one hand. Chu Xiaobao hugged his shoulders and looked around curiously. Just now, he was carried by Maman outside the door. It was pouring rain outside and thunder was rumbling. He was timid and was scared to tears, crying for Gu Jinglian. Gu Jinglian did not want the little guy to come into contact with such a scene. However, as the young master of the Gu family, he would definitely see more of such scenes in the future. He soon discovered the corpse lying in a pool of blood in the casino. Confusion flashed across his eyes, but when he recognized the sticky bloodstains on the ground, his face turned ghastly pale in fright. "Uncle." "Ugh, so much blood." Maman looked at the child's shocked expression and could not help but ask worriedly, "Do you want the young master to leave for a while?" "No need." Gu Jinglian sneered. "The people of the Gu family have lived a life of licking blood from the tip of a knife since they were young. If they can't even see such a scene, How can they still be considered a member of the Gu family? Chapter 2778. There's no need. Gu Jinglian sneered. The Gu family members have been living on the edge of a knife since young. If they can't even see such a scene, how can they still be considered part of the Gu family? Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Baochu with one hand. His eyes suddenly narrowed dangerously as he cursed silently in his heart. Who gave the Green Dragon gang the courage to come knocking on his door? As he thought about it, he called out, "Lin Suong." A response came from the black suit behind him. After a while, a burly man walked out. He lowered his head and walked in front of him. He said in a deep voice, "Boss, please give me your orders." Gu Jinglian's fingertips gently caressed the baby's soft cheeks. He said without raising his head, "If I remember correctly, Muroga has always been under the jurisdiction of Vermilion Bird Hall. As the hall master of Vermilion Bird Hall, you let me see such a scene today. I'm very unhappy." His strange smile suddenly sent a chill down Lin Suhong's spine. He was a little shocked. Just as he was feeling guilty, he saw the man turn around and glance at him from the corner of his eyes. He said with a smile that was not a smile, "You should know that I don't keep useless people under me. You should think about how to protect your position as hall master." His heart suddenly sank. He immediately rushed in front of him and knelt on the ground with a plop. He said with a head full of cold sweat, "I'm sorry, boss. What happened tonight was my mistake. Get out of the way. Don't block the way." Gu Jinglian did not even look at him and kicked him to the side. He walked a few steps towards the door and suddenly remembered something. He said coldly, "Lin Suong, if you don't clean this place up, don't think about keeping your hands." After saying that, he sneered and walked away with the baby in one hand. He left Lin Suong alone on the ground, trembling with fear. Until Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Baochu out of the door, the child in his arms was still in great fear and trembling all over. So much blood. So much blood. The ground is covered in blood. Chu Xiaobao had never seen such a scene before. However, for as long as Gu Jinglian could remember, he was carried in the arms of his father's subordinates. When he was patrolling the casino, he was not used to seeing such a scene. Those who had their fingers chopped off because of cheating were holding their bloody palms and wailing in pain. The gamblers who had their legs broken and were lying on the ground convulsing from the immense pain. In fact, because of the drug abuse, he was in a state of madness. The scenes of men and women abandoning all restraint were incomparably deep in his memory when he was young. Children who grew up in the Gu family had to experience this from a young age. Chu Xiaobao asked fearfully, "Uncle, did you kill those people?" Gu Jinglian leaned lazily against the back seat and lowered his head to look helplessly at Xiaobao, who was crying non-stop in his arms. He was physically and mentally exhausted from the crying. He gently ran his long fingers through his hair and sighed in annoyance. It seemed that he had made a wrong decision. It seemed that he should not have brought this child to such an occasion. Looking at him crying and throwing a tantrum, he actually felt a sense of pity for him. Was it an illusion? He actually felt heartache and pity for a person. Could it be that because this child was his flesh and blood, he had developed a feeling of pity for the child? "Stop crying." Mammon, who was at the side, was dumbfounded. Chapter 2779. Chu Xiaobao, this guy was his child. When he first learned of this fact, he could not accept it. After all, a little guy who fell from the sky with the same bloodline as him was too sudden, so he could not quickly integrate into the role of a father. He could not help but think that life was really a strange thing. Inexplicably, this child who appeared had his blood flowing in his body. However, he was cold and proud. He had no concept of such a special emotion as family. However, when he saw Chu Xiaobao curled up in the corner of the sofa, dozing off, his head heavy. In the end, he fell clumsily on the sofa. Then, he woke up abruptly and got up from the sofa. He rubbed his eyes sleepily. That sleepy and confused look was actually a little simple and honest and cute. Like a little panda. For some reason, the place in his heart softened slightly. For the first time, he realized that such a cute little guy was his son. He walked to the sofa and reached out to ravage his head. In his confusion, Xiaobao reached out his small hand to grab his hand. Such a small hand just happened to hold two of his fingers. It was so soft and cute. This kind of emotion resonated with him. It was really magical. Her hands were so small and tender as if they were carved out of tofu. Her cheeks were pink and had the unique milky fragrance of a child. Her chubby body, especially her belly, was so round that it looked as if it could be broken by the wind. Perhaps it was because she had eaten her fill at dinner. Gu Jinglian looked at him seriously. His eyebrows and eyes were similar to his, but they were not fully open yet. His eyes were black and white, watery and sparkling. His eyelids were slightly red. Perhaps it was because he had cried just now, but his eyelashes were still faintly stained with dew. They were very similar. At first, he did not particularly look at this child. When his subordinate said that this child was similar to him, he did not think much of it. However, after taking a closer look, he realized that they were very similar. Just like a replica of him when he was young. This was his son. Gu Jinglian's son. A descendant of the Gu family. He could not help but outline an unfamiliar arc. It was like tenderness. Seeing him cry, Gu Jinglian finally could not bear it. "Maman." "Yes," Gu Jinglian said. "Bring the little toy from the trunk over." Maman's eyebrows furrowed, and the corner of his lips twitched violently. He turned around and fetched it for him. "Coax him." Gu Jinglian gave the order again. The corner of Maman's lips twitched again. If he was asked to climb a mountain of blades or dive into a sea of fire, he would not hesitate at all. However, wasn't it too much to coax a child? However, despite his misgivings, he still obeyed Gu Jinglian's orders. Shaking the doll in his hand, Maman coaxed and lied to the baby in Gu Jinglian's arms. His voice was as gentle as it could be. "Little master, look at what this is." "Cute." The subordinate standing beside Maman actually wanted to say that the anime seemed to have been outdated a long time ago. Gu Jinglian rubbed his head. After careful consideration, he decided to do it himself and coax this timid little fellow. "Good boy, don't be afraid. It's fake." His words caused the little guy to be surprised. "Ah, fake." Chu Xiaobao stared at him with tears in his eyes. He did not believe him. "Where's the blood?" "It's all ketchup." Chapter 2780. Ketchup. When Chu Xiaobao heard this, he immediately stopped crying and did not feel afraid anymore. In the end, he was easy to deceive. With just a few words, he was coaxed. He blindly believed Gu Jinglian's words and did not doubt them at all. Originally, he was afraid of the smell of blood, but now, because of his few words, his courage gradually grew. "Are you playing a game?" Chu Xiaobao pointed at the blood splattered on his body. "Is this also ketchup?" "Yes." Chu Xiaobao heaved a long sigh of relief and patted his chest lightly. However, he was still breathing rapidly with lingering fear. "I thought you were really a heinous scoundrel. Murder and arson, this kind of scoundrel is very scary." Chu Xiaobao's unintentional words caused Gu Jinglian to be stunned for a moment. "I hate scoundrels," Chu Xiaobao emphasized again. Suddenly, he changed the topic and whispered, "However, Uncle looks like a very elegant gentleman. He must not be a bad person." Gu Jinglian was startled for a long time. He suddenly frowned slightly, but seemed to be deep in thought. Maman respectfully walked forward and leaned close to the window. Gu Jinglian stretched out his long fingers and gently rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Without raising his head, he asked coldly, "Is the leader of the Azure Dragon Group completely dead?" Maman said, "No, there's still a pulse, but his breathing is very weak." He raised his eyebrows impatiently and curled his lips. "He's not even dead yet. His life is really tough. It's good to keep him. Bring him back. I still have something to ask." "Yes, there's more." Maman was puzzled. Boss, please give your orders." Gu Jinglian said coldly to Maman, "Don't waste time. Deal with it cleanly." "Yes, sir. Also, everyone except Long Si, do it for me. Don't leave a single one alive." "Yes, sir." Gu Jinglian frowned and scolded with a gloomy expression. "It's really bad luck to see blood in the middle of the night." The car window rolled up and the car drove away. 2 days later in the morning, Chu Ho was pushed into the operating room for a minimally invasive surgery. Meng Qingxue waited outside the operating room. She was scared out of her wits. The doctor said that the operation was very risky. However, he refused to say exactly how big the risk was. He only said that the worst-case scenario was that he would end up in a vegetative state. Meng Qingxue wanted to give up on the operation. However, The doctor said that the chances of him becoming a vegetable were very small. It was just that before the surgery, the chief surgeon would habitually report the worst-case scenario in advance so that the family could be mentally prepared. After a second brain CT scan, the doctor said with relief that the blood clot in the brain was not in the ventricle or the skull. This meant that there was no need to use a craniotomy plan for the surgery. However, in order to prevent future problems, it was recommended that she undergo surgery immediately to remove the blood clot in her brain. The cost of the surgery was very high. Chu Ho naturally did not have such wealth. As for Meng Qingxue, she naturally did not have that much savings. She discussed this matter with Mu Yanqing, but Mu Yanqing paid for all the medical expenses without hesitation. Meng Qingxue was very grateful. She hoped that the operation would be successful. It would be best if Chu Ho could recover his original memory. Losing one's memory was a very painful thing. She did not expect Mu Yanqing to agree to it so readily without a second thought. Chapter 2781. He was not so kind-hearted as to pay hundreds of thousands of yuan for an unrelated person's medical expenses for no reason. However, Chu Ho was different. During this period of time, Meng Qingxue had been staying at his house. He had to admit that Chu Ho had taken very good care of her. He wasn't a heartless person, and he still had to remember this favor. After all, he did not take good care of his woman. This Chu Ho had taken care of Qingxue for him for a period of time. He had to repay this favor. Moreover, to him, a few 100,000 was an insignificant amount. It was completely insignificant. However, if such an insignificant amount could evoke her gratitude, then it would definitely be worth it. While the operation was still ongoing, Meng Qingxue called Mu Yanqing. Mu Yanqing said that there was a board meeting in the morning and that he needed to attend. Previously, because he had left the capital and was not in the company for a long time, a few senior executives were dissatisfied and criticized him without thinking. Even Mu Linfeng scolded him harshly. Mu Yanqing said that he would rush to the hospital immediately after the meeting. Meng Qingxue hung up the phone, but she felt an inexplicable feeling. Mu Yanqing seemed to be treating her differently than before. In the past, when she called him, he would never pick up when he was busy, let alone when he was in a meeting. Even if he was free, he would not immediately think of coming to her side to accompany her. Just now, he said over the phone that he would come to the hospital to accompany her after the meeting. He had changed. He seemed to be gentler, more considerate, and more affectionate toward her than before. She could not get used to this Mu Yanqing in such a short time. Meng Qingxue could not help but think mockingly. Could it be that he only feels that he should cherish something when he loses it? She looked up at the lights above the operating theater. The doctor said that the operation would probably last until the afternoon. As it was a relatively major and complicated operation, the process was relatively long. Meng Qingxue looked at the time. It was almost noon and her stomach was a little hungry. Hence, she planned to go to the snack bar to buy some bread and yogurt to fill her stomach. As she was worried about Chu Ho, she was not in the mood to go to a restaurant. Meng Qingxue walked to the snack bar, bought some bread and water, and turned to enter the elevator. When she returned to the entrance of the operating theater, she was surprised to see a woman sitting on a bench outside with her arms crossed with an arrogant expression. She was surrounded by several tall men in suits. Meng Qingxue was stunned. She thought that she had gone in the wrong direction. However, when she got closer, the woman sitting on the bench also noticed her. She raised her head, and on her face with light makeup, her eyes were extremely sharp and domineering. "You are..." Meng Qingxue did not know her and had never seen her before. However, when she spoke, the woman sneered and said coldly, "So Meng Qingxue looks like this? I thought you were as beautiful as a fairy. Now that I've seen it with my own eyes, that's all there is to it." The moment she opened her mouth, Meng Qingxue was taken aback. It was as if a taut string in her head had snapped. She frowned and uttered the name she had suspected. "Are you Xianxia?" "Oh." Xianxia raised a brow in surprise. "You know me?" Chapter 2782. That name is like thunder to my ears. Meng Qingxue curled her lips and asked bluntly, "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing?" Xianxia was so angry that she laughed. She found the other's question extremely laughable. Her gaze was fixed on the other's stomach as she said fiercely, "Meng Qingxue, since you know who I am, not only do you not show any sense of shame, you even ask me who I am as if it's a matter of course. I'm Mu Yanqing's fiancée and the future young mistress of the Mu group. We're officially married. What about you? I don't know where this wild vixen came from, but you're delusional enough to snatch my man. Are you even worthy? Mu Yanqing is my fiancé and future husband. Who do you think you are? Wild vixen? Meng Qingxue burst into laughter when she heard this term. Xianxia, how can you be so smug? Strictly speaking, you're the real third party, right? Yanqing and I have been dating for 3 years, and our relationship is stable. I don't know what tricks you used to force him to marry you for no reason. Yanqing loves me, not you. Xianxia sneered. Since you keep saying that Yanqing loves you, why would he rather marry me than give you a status? Meng Qingxue's words hit the nail on the head and she was at a loss for words. There was a boom. As if she had been struck by lightning, she could not move at all. This was an irrefutable fact. Yes. Mu Yanqing kept telling her how much he cared about her, but he was unwilling to marry her. However, no matter how much he detested Xianxia, she was still his legitimate fiancée. She bit her lip tightly as her face turned pale. She did not know how to refute this. Xianxia continued aggressively. No matter how unwilling you are to admit this matter, the truth is still the truth. Do you think Mu Yanqing loves you that much? Or do you think that binding you to my side is just because I covet your youth? I admit that you do have some beauty, and Yanqing has taken a fancy to this. He wants to possess you and squander your beautiful youth, but he's unwilling to give you a home. He wants to possess you without restraint, but he's not even willing to give you a status. Don't tell me you really think that this is what love is. He said he loved you, but he wasn't willing to give up his wealth for you. Do you know why Yanqing agreed to marry me? Because with my ability, I can give him everything he wants: power, prestige and status. Is this something you can afford to give me? Not only can you not afford it, but for you, he might even have to give up his wealth. Right now, the only reason he didn't change his mind was that he hadn't had enough fun yet. When he's tired of you, you'll be nothing more than a withered flower. Shut up. Meng Qingxue couldn't take it anymore. She interrupted her and sneered. So? You traveled thousands of miles to find me, just to show off your prowess? I won't fall for that. Withered flower. How could this woman's mouth be so vicious? Ha ha. Xianxia sized her up before her gaze slowly moved down and finally landed on her flat belly. She suddenly mocked. Oh, how could I forget that you're pregnant? Why? Did Yanqing ask you to give birth to this child? Didn't he ask you to abort it? Chapter 2783. Tisk, tsk, tsk. Xianxia shook her head mockingly. If this child is really Yanqing's, it should be very beautiful. However, it's a pity that the mother is disappointing. This child is destined to be a bastard from the moment it's born. Meng Qingxue sneered and retorted, It's not up to you to judge whether it's a bastard or not. I'm just telling the truth. As Xianxia spoke, she stroked her lower abdomen meaningfully and smiled. It's also an unborn child. My child is destined to be doted on the moment it's born. What about the child in your stomach? It's a bastard from the moment it's born. It's destined to have no status for the rest of its life. Even if Yanqing brings the child back to the Mu family out of consideration for their relationship, it will be suppressed by my child for the rest of its life. Haha. Meng Qingxue's face turned pale. Her actions made it seem as if she was already pregnant. She exuded an extremely dazzling motherly glow from head to toe, even though she knew very well that Xianxia was deliberately faking it. However, she really did not know that Xianxia was pregnant. She looked at Xianxia's lower abdomen suspiciously. It was also flat. If she was pregnant, it was probably not too long ago. You're pregnant? Meng Qingxue was in disbelief. Seeing her puzzled expression, Xianxia's lips curled into a smug smile as she said frankly, Yes. I'm pregnant with Yanqing's child. Meng Qingxue's face turned pale. Xianxia became even more smug when she saw this. She snorted coldly and said, Judging from your expression, you seem very surprised. Why? Yanqing didn't tell you about this, did he? Look, he says that he loves you, but he's not even honest with you. In that case, did Yanqing tell you about my pregnancy long ago? Meng Qingxue asked coldly. Xianxia's expression froze. Meng Qingxue suppressed the resentment in her heart and suddenly let out a chilling laugh. Xianxia, I thought you were very capable, but here I am. So, are you using your status and power to blackmail Yanqing into marrying you? Is this what you're capable of? I don't think you're that capable. Otherwise, why would she come all the way here to flaunt her prowess when she's pregnant? I think your relationship with Yanqing is also very distant. What? Xianxia thought that her words would anger the missy. Unexpectedly, Meng Qingxue did not fall for this trick. Yes, Yanqing did say that he can't marry me, even though my relationship with him is a little shady. But, I'm willing to do it. Meng Qingxue paused for a moment and then sneered. Who's the one suppressing who? Xianxia, do you think you're so glorious now that you'll be able to make a comeback? With the passage of time, she was nothing more than a withered flower. At the end of the day, what else do you have other than your own superiority? But I'm different from you. Yanqing really likes to Yanqing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have personally come to Yen City to persuade me to come back. What? You? Meng Qingxue, you're really shameless. Xianxia was furious. Chapter 2784. As for status, those things are indeed very important. However, what I can't have now doesn't mean that I can't have it in the future. Have you heard of a third party ascending to the top? Xianxia, let's wait and see. I swear that I'll take back everything that originally belonged to me. His heart, his body, I want all of it. Along with my status. Together. If you have the guts, destroy me. Otherwise, I'll take back everything that you have now. You! Xianxia was furious. With nowhere to vent her anger, she bit her lip hard and clenched her fists. Then with a sinister smile she said coldly, all of you go. Teach this shameless be'T a lesson. Let her know what it means by saying that trouble comes from a loose tongue. As soon as she finished speaking, the bodyguards behind her closed in on Meng Qingxue, eyeing her covetously. Meng Qingxue, however, did not show the slightest bit of fear. Instead, she calmly watched as they closed in and surrounded her. The next second, Mu Yanqing's cold voice came from behind. All of you, stop it. Xianxia was stunned. When she came back to her senses, she looked in the direction of the voice and saw Mu Yanqing walking toward Meng Qingxue. When he reached her side, he stopped in his tracks and raised his leg to kick the bodyguard who was about to make a move on Meng Qingxue. Get lost. The bodyguard did not lose his temper at all and dodged to the side dejectedly. No one would dare to go against the person with the highest authority in the Mu family. Mu Yanqing. Why is he here? She had found out that Meng Qingxue was in this hospital earlier, so she came here with her men. She wanted to take advantage of Mu Yanqing's return to the Mu group for a board meeting to show her who was boss. Yanqing. Xianxia was flustered and exasperated. I was wondering why I didn't see you these few days. It turns out that you've been with this be'Tch all this time. Have you forgotten about our marriage agreement? Who is this woman? You're not even married yet, and you're already flirting with other women. Mu Yanqing, let's see how you're going to explain this to me. She spoke in a righteous manner, as if she was a first wife who had caught an adulterer in the act. The man swept a cold glance at her and sneered. Xianxia, we're not married yet. There wasn't even an engagement. Don't talk to me in such a tone. You don't have the qualifications to do that. You! Xianxia sneered in anger. Are you speaking up for this wild woman? Don't forget that I'm your legitimate fiancé. And she. Shut up. Mu Yanqing was obviously protecting Meng Qingxue, and his tone towards Xianxia was extremely nasty. Xianxia's heart ached even more when she saw this. When Meng Qingxue saw him, she immediately hugged him aggrievedly. Burying her head in his chest, she sobbed. Yanqing, you're here. You came at the right time. If you came one step later, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep the child in my stomach. You know what? She said, I'm a wild vixen, you're playing with my feelings. She even said that the child in my stomach was a bastard and that it would be a bastard the moment it was born. But I don't understand. If this child is a bastard, then as the child's father, wouldn't she be insulting you? I couldn't stand it, so I retorted a few times. She flew into a rage and said that she wanted to abort my child. I was so scared. She pretended to be weak and helpless. Mu Yanqing's heart ached when he saw this. Chapter 2785. This B*TCH really knows how to sow discord. When did she say that she wanted to get rid of the child in her womb? Bastard child. When Mu Yanqing heard this, he laughed out of anger. He glanced coldly at Xianxia and said without thinking, "If Qingxue is pregnant with a bastard child, then what about the one in your womb? At the very least, the child in her womb was personally conceived by me. Let me tell you, I admit to this child. Furthermore, I'll take good care of it. As for the child in your womb, I've never touched you. What dirty and despicable means did you use to conceive it? You know very well in your heart." What? Meng Qingxue seized the opportunity to ask. She said that the child in her womb is yours? Why? Isn't it yours? The child is mine. But I've never touched her. Mu Yanqing said coldly. As for how the child came about, she knows very well in her heart. Mu Yanqing. Xianxia could not take it anymore and questioned hysterically, "Must you stand on her side and defend her? Mu Yanqing, do you have a conscience? I'm pregnant with your child, too. No matter how this child came about, it's still your flesh and blood and has your blood flowing in it. How can you be so cruel and heartless?" Cruel and heartless. Mu Yanqing sneered. Xianxia, don't make it sound so dignified. It's as if I have to marry you. You have to know that if you hadn't used such despicable means, I wouldn't have taken a liking to a filthy woman like you. I'm warning you, don't play any more tricks. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude to you. You! She could not refute his coldness. She could not help but clench her fists so hard that her sharp nails almost dug into her palms. She sucked in a few breaths of cold air and suddenly said fiercely, "Mu Yanqing, you win. Just you wait and see." With that, the Missy stormed off in a huff. The bodyguards behind her exchanged glances before hurrying after her and soon disappeared from their sight. It was only after Xianxia left that Meng Qingxue regained her cool demeanor. She pushed him away unhappily and walked to the side with an awkward look on her face. Mu Yanqing walked over and held her shoulders. Straightening her body, he asked patiently, "What's wrong? Did she make you angry?" "What else?" Meng Qingxue smiled faintly. "Mu Yanqing, you're really amazing. Do you think it's still ancient times? Do they still practice polygamy? Today, there was Xianxia. Tomorrow, there would be another Lienya. What should I do? I don't even have a status. Do I deserve to be trampled under their feet?" Don't overthink it. However, Meng Qingxue did not listen to his superficial words. Instead, she asked, "Is the child in her stomach yours?" Mu Yanqing was stunned for a moment before he nodded. "Yes." Meng Qingxue clenched her fists and hit him hard. "How could you do this?" Mu Yanqing immediately grabbed her punching hands and explained, "Qingxue, things aren't what you think. Didn't I say just now that I didn't lay a finger on her?" Chapter 2786. She stole someone else's sperm to conceive that child. Mu Yanqing interrupted her. Meng Qingxue widened her eyes in shock. "What? You should know that I have a second brother." Mu Yanqing decided to come clean with her about this matter. "Xianxia is in love with my second brother and wants to marry him wholeheartedly. This woman's abacus was extremely shrewd. How did she do it? Behind everyone's back, she secretly stole Mu Yaja's sperm from the Mu family's sperm bank and went to America for artificial insemination. After that, just as she wished, she successfully got pregnant. But no matter how good she is at scheming, how can she scheme against that second brother of mine? Mu Yaja secretly did something behind her back and destroyed his sperm from the bank long ago. Xianxia used my sperm to conceive the child." What? Meng Qingxue turned pale with fright. This was ridiculous. This was even more bizarre than the bizarre plots in the television dramas she had watched. Sperm? Artificial insemination? How could that woman do such a thing? Shameless. Xianxia even accused the child in her womb of being a bastard. Then, what was the child in her womb? The child in her womb was the one with an unknown origin. How did you know about this? Meng Qingxue asked suspiciously. Since you knew, why didn't you force her to abort the child in her womb? I didn't know about this before. After all, I wasn't very familiar with her at that time. Mu Yanqing also felt wronged. If I had known, I would have done it long before the Song family found out about this. Would I have waited until now?
Then, what exactly is going on?
Meng Qingxue sneered. What ability does that woman have to pin this on you? Hee hee. She was kept in the dark from the start too. That second brother of mine is quite capable. He stole the sky and swapped the sun without anyone noticing. Xianxia was overjoyed after she got pregnant. However, when she returned to the country in high spirits and eagerly went to Wuxia to tell him the truth, Wuxia refused to admit that the child in her stomach was his. Xianxia took out the DNA test report, but because I'm related to Wuxia by blood, no matter how the child is tested, it's definitely related to Wuxia. He paused for a moment before his expression turned frosty. After all her scheming, Xianxia probably knew that it was impossible between her and Wuxia anymore. So, she schemed against me again. Since the child in her stomach is not Wuxia's, my shrewd second brother will naturally not admit it. But the child had to have a status and a father. He couldn't just abort it. She's the city's young lady. If news of her abortion were to spread, it would bring shame to the Song family. So, she schemed against me. That night, I bumped into her at a bar. She spiked my drink and brought me to a hotel. The next day, she slandered me for sleeping with her. At first, I was kept in the dark. But after that, I specially sent someone to investigate this matter. I didn't expect to be set up from the start. So? Meng Qingxue could not help but feel indignant when she heard this. Why did you marry such a woman? Chapter 2787. Mu Yanqing's expression was a little solemn. I just got promoted and didn't have a strong foundation. If I were to marry into the Song family, my position would be stabilized. Hence, I obeyed my second uncle's wishes and agreed to marry her. Meng Qingxue bit her lip hard. She could not take it lying down. She could not take it lying down. At the end of the day, it's because I'm a commoner with no status or background that I can't be with you, right? Meng Qingxue smiled coldly and suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. How ridiculous! What's the point of marriage? Isn't it because of love? What a joke! Mu Yanqing suddenly stopped talking. Seeing that he did not speak, Meng Qingxue felt a chill in her heart. She suddenly turned around and sat back on the bench in silence. However, the tears in her eyes could not be stopped. What Xianxia said was right. He could love her and give her all the glory and wealth, but he could not give her the most basic status. What was the difference between her and a canary if she stayed by his side? She swore that she would snatch Mu Yanqing back from Xianxia. Unfortunately, she did not have a family background like Xianxia's. Just the word family background was enough to crush her powerlessly. Mu Yanqing walked over and sat down beside her. He reached out his long arms and pulled her into his embrace. Qingxue, don't think too much. I can swear to you that I have no feelings for Xianxia at all. Everything can't even be considered as an act. In the future, I won't be like before and indulge in debauchery outside. I can promise you that from now on, I'll only have you and treat you well. I'll take good care of you. Mu Yanqing promised her again and again. I'll only have you in the future. There won't be any other woman. Qingxue, I'll definitely keep my promise. This is my promise to you. You can give me everything, but you can't marry me. Meng Qingxue suddenly became agitated. Why are you so obsessed with marriage? Mu Yanqing asked in puzzlement. Meng Qingxue's expression suddenly froze. She looked at him bitterly. Then what should I be obsessed with? Isn't marriage where love belongs? Wasn't this natural? This was a title, and also a basic respect for me. Mu Yanqing, do you even know what I need? Mu Yanqing looked at her expressionlessly in silence. Seeing that he was silent, Meng Qingxue felt even more wronged. Suddenly, she sucked in a breath of cold air. Her eyes were slightly red as she said calmly, I saw the news some time ago. Mu Yaja's fiancée is that popular A-list actress, Xianxia. I know that Mu Yaja is your second brother. I also know that he was willing to give up everything in the Mu group, including that glorious title, for Xianxia's sake. When I saw it, I was really touched. I was envious of Xianxia for being married to love. But I know that this kind of utopian love is something that can only be hoped for but not achieved. But to be honest, when I saw the news, I was so envious that my eyes were about to pierce through. Why can Yun be so happy, while I can only live lowly?
Mu Yanqing suddenly interrupted him coldly.
Are you blaming me? Mu Yanqing asked again, or are you blaming me for being useless? Chapter 2788.
Meng Qingxue looked up at him in surprise, only to see that his face was cold.
It was no longer as gentle and warm as before and was filled with unfamiliar hostility. Now that she was pregnant, no matter what she said, he would go along with it. Even if he had to coax or lie to her, he would never let her suffer. However, his pride could not tolerate comparing him to Mu Yaja. When he was young in the Mu family, Mu Yaja was the one who was compared the most. He had heard the name Mu Yaja so many times that his ears were about to grow calluses. This name was shrouded in a halo, like a high and mighty god, unreachable. Some people were born with outstanding talent, such as Mu Yaja. Some people were not talented enough, such that even if they worked hard later on, it would be difficult for them to surpass them, such as him. It was not that he did not work hard, but no matter how hard he worked, he could not catch up to this man. Of all the things she shouldn't have done, the thing she shouldn't have done the most was to compare him with that man. However, it did not matter who compared him to Mu Yaja. It just had to be her. It just had to be the person closest to him. Since you think Mu Yaja is better, why did you choose me? Meng Qingxue's face turned pale for a moment, and she could not say anything. Qingxue, do you know why I want to marry Song Enya? Mu Yanchen smiled wickedly and said word by word, because only by relying on the power of the Song family can I help. I've just risen to power and don't have a strong foundation, so I need a marriage alliance to strengthen my background. Do you understand? Meng Qingxue could not take it anymore and asked, are the so-called power, status, glory, and wealth really that important? Power, status, glory, and wealth? Not important. Mu Yanqing sneered. Do you still remember? Back then, when you signed with the modeling agency, how much did I have to pay for the breach of contract? Meng Qingxue's lips trembled. 300,000. What I didn't tell you was that the boss of the modeling agency raised the price and demanded 2 million before he would let you go. If I hadn't used some means to pressure them, 300,000? Do you want to leave? Do you remember the man you offended at the bar? Meng Qingxue recalled for a while in a daze. That's right. Back when she had accompanied Mu Yanqing to a bar, a middle-aged man happened to be sitting in the private room next door. When Mu Yanqing was dragged away to socialize, the man took the opportunity to take advantage of her under the influence of alcohol. In a fit of anger, she gave him 2 tight slaps across the face, causing the old man's eardrums to perforate. However, she did not expect him to be a high-ranking official in a certain company. In a fit of anger, he decided to teach her a lesson. In the end, I also used some means to suppress it. If I had no power or influence, what would you do? Until now, you will still be tied up by the modeling agency and sold to those old and fat men at a high price. Meng Qingxue's shoulders trembled violently. Mu Yanqing's face turned ashen again. Speaking of which, you're asking me how important wealth is. If I weren't Mu Yanqing and didn't have that kind of wealth, where would you have paid for your friend's surgery fees? After the child is born, the child's maintenance fees, nutrition fees, and confinement fees. Can you do that with magic? Do you really have a place to stay in such a big city? Haha. Stop joking. Meng Qingxue was stunned again. Chapter 2789. Mu Yanqing suddenly sneered. Meng Qingxue, don't put yourself on such a high pedestal. Power, glory, and wealth. Which man doesn't yearn for such things? Yes. I don't have Mu Yaja's boldness. I can't give up everything for a woman. I don't have his capability either. Even if I leave the Mu family, I can still obtain everything on my own. Yes. I'm incompetent. I don't have Mu Yaja's sense of responsibility. I'm incompetent and weak. If it weren't for Mu Yaja giving up that position, I wouldn't have the capability to be at the helm of Dishing Financial Group. Are you satisfied with what I've said? His self-esteem was being trampled on by her. All along, Mu Yanqing had prided himself on being contradictory. Being born into the Mu family, he had a sense of superiority, but being compared to Mu Yaja made him feel inferior. The combination of the two contradicted and repelled each other. Finally, there was a glimmer of hope. He tried his best to grasp it,
But he did not expect that the woman closest to him would give him such a rude awakening.
Meng Qingxue bit her lower lip hard. I didn't mean that. Meng Qingxue, do you know? I'm doing this because I promised myself that I'll give you and the child in your tummy the best life possible. I can promise you that I won't lay a finger on Xianxia, much less any other woman. What are your intentions, though? Why do you have to trample on my self-esteem like this? Mu Yanqing's body stiffened and tensed up after venting his anger.
Under his shirt, the lines of his muscles could be clearly seen, as if they were filled with anger.
Meng Qingxue also knew that she had said something wrong. She was flustered and vexed. She wanted to explain herself, but she did not know where to start. Yanqing, calm down. Meng Qingxue hesitated for a moment before spitting out a few words with difficulty. I said something wrong. It seems that you haven't considered our relationship properly, Mu Yanqing said with a livid face.
He stood up abruptly and turned to leave without looking back.
Yanqing. When Meng Qingxue saw that he just walked away, she couldn't help but feel a little anxious. She got up and wanted to chase after him. However, the surgical lights behind him suddenly went out. The door suddenly opened. When Meng Qingxue heard the commotion, she turned around and saw that the door of the operating theater was wide open. A group of medical staff pushed a bed out in a hurry.
She looked anxiously in the direction where Mu Yanqing had left and then at Chu Ho, who was being wheeled out by a group of nurses. After a moment of hesitation, she clenched her fists tightly and walked toward the chief surgeon.
Doctor, how was the surgery? Was it successful?
The doctor glanced at her and saw tears on her face. He thought that she was worried and afraid, so he immediately comforted her. Miss, don't worry. The operation was a success.
However, the patient will have to be transferred to the intensive care unit immediately. After the surgery, he has to rest well until the infection period passes. Meng Qingxue's mind was still firmly occupied by Mu Yanqing's words just now. She only knew that Chu Ho's surgery was very successful. While she was happy, she was also distracted by Mu Yanqing's words. Meng Qingxue asked tentatively, then, is the medical fees enough?
When the doctor heard this, he was stunned and asked doubtfully. The gentleman who was with you previously paid for all the expenses.
He paid 300,000 yuan in one go. Didn't you know? Chapter 2790. Meng Qingxue was stunned, as if she had been struck by lightning. If you don't have any wealth, will you be able to conjure up the money for your friend's surgery?
Wasn't the doctor's words a wake-up call for her as well?
Meng Qingxue's heart suddenly clenched. Her breathing quickened and she was about to suffocate. Got it. Then, thank you, doctor. Don't worry. If you recover well and recuperate well, you should be able to regain your memory soon. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists and nodded blankly. After settling the procedures, Chu Ho was quickly transferred to the ward. Meng Qingxue stood by the bed absent-mindedly. Looking at Chu Ho, who was still under general anesthesia, her mind was filled with Mu Yanqing's angry words. What are you up to? Why do you have to trample on my self-esteem like this? Meng Qingxue suddenly broke down.
Covering her face with both hands, she weakly retorted, I didn't. I really didn't. Chu Ho could not hear her muttering now.
She was wearing an oxygen tube and her eyes were tightly shut. Her face was dead calm. Chu Ho, what should I do? Meng Qingxue gritted her teeth. I hope he knows that even if he has nothing, I'm still willing to be with him.
However, I can't refute what he said at all.
But he really misunderstood what I meant. In the darkness, Chu Ho felt as if she was drowning in a black ocean. She was bobbing up and down, as if she was drowning in the water. She opened her eyes in a daze, only to see endless darkness. It was as if her soul had left her body and was floating in mid-air, without a sense of belonging. Who am I? Where am I? In a daze, Chu Ho seemed to hear someone calling her name. Vermilion Bird. Vermilion Bird. This was not her name at all. It was very unfamiliar, yet it felt familiar at the same time.
It was gently calling out to her, and she actually had an unimaginable sense of belonging.
Officer Vermilion Bird. Here. The Secretary General invites you to his office. He has an important talk. I'll be right there. Chu Ho looked in the direction of the voice and saw a woman who looked exactly like her. She was wearing a well-ironed uniform. She was tall and her back was straight. Her uniform was full of heroic spirit, which made her look fierce and valiant. On the armband was the symbol of Interpol, a sharp sword piercing through the earth and a scale pole, symbolizing the supreme majesty and justice. His field of vision gradually cleared, and what entered his eyes was a tall building filled with a majestic aura. The building was squarish, like a silver fortress, towering and magnificent. At the entrance of the building, the English logo Interpol was extremely eye-catching. Interpol was the second largest international organization in the world after the United Nations. It was also the largest police organization in the world. They play an irreplaceable role in deepening police cooperation and cracking down on transnational crimes. Interpol, or ICPO for short, was established in 1923. It was originally called the International Criminal Police Committee, and its headquarters was set up in Vienna, the capital of Austria.